After my wife's funeral, I never mentioned the second house, or the $480,000 she left me. A week later, my son said, "Start packing, the house is sold." I smiled, I had already packed. But they weren't the funeral flowers had only just begun to fade when the call started. I was in my kitchen on a Thursday morning 2 weeks after we buried Helen, watching the steam curl from a mug I hadn't touched. Dark green ceramic chipped at the handle of Father's Day gift from my granddaughter Emily years ago now felt heavy foreign, like it belonged to a man I no longer was. Everything felt foreign. The house, my reflection in the hallway mirror, and even my voice when I answer the relentless phone calls from my children. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Dad, we need to talk about the house. Mark's voice carried that restrained impatience I'd known since he was a teenager asking for money. Only now at 38, he wasn't asking. I set the mug down without drinking. "Good morning to you too, Mark. Don't start with me," he said. "Laura and I have been talking. This place is too big for you alone. The taxes, the upkeep, it's not realistic. We've already found a buyer." "There is no mortgage," I said. The words came out flat factual. Helen and I had paid it off 6 years ago, but I'd never told the kids. They assumed and I let them. Silence, then a short laugh, sharp dismissive, the same one he inherited from me, though I'd never used it like a blade. "Dad, please. Mom's pension barely covered her medications. We all know you're under strain." I walked to the window above the sink, looking out at the garden Helen and I had tended for 25 years. The rosemary leaned into the stone path. The lemon tree needed pruning. Every plant, every stone wall had become a monument to everything I'd lost. The funeral flowers had only just begun to fade when the calls started. I was in my kitchen on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after we buried Helen, watching the steam curl from a mug I hadn't touched. Dark green ceramic chipped at the handle. A Father's Day gift from my granddaughter Emily years ago now felt heavy. Foreign, like it belonged to a man I no longer was. Everything felt foreign. The house, my reflection in the hallway mirror, and even my voice when I answer the relentless phone calls from my children. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Dad, we need to talk about the house. Mark's voice carried that restrained impatience I'd known since he was a teenager asking for money. Only now at 38 he wasn't asking. I set the mug down without drinking. "Good morning to you too, Mark. Don't start with me," he said. "Laura and I have been talking. This place is too big for you alone. The taxes, the upkeep, it's not realistic. We've already found a buyer. There is no mortgage." I said the words came out flat factual. Helen and I had paid it off 6 years ago, but I'd never told the kids. They assumed and I let them. Silence, then a short laugh, sharp dismissive, the same one he inherited from me, though I'd never used it like a blade. "Dad, please. Mom's pension barely covered her medications. We all know you're under strain." I walked to the window above the sink, looking out at the garden Helen and I had tended for 25 years. The rosemary leaned into the stone path. The lemon tree needed pruning. Every plant, every stone wall had become a monument to everything I'd lost. "You're worried about me? Is that it?" I asked. "I'm worried about what's practical," he replied, each word clipped. "We could put the money from the sale to good use. Laura's got Emily's tuition and Laura and I stopped listening to his wife's name." My mind was already building the scene. Mark at their dining table laptop open a spreadsheet, glowing columns labeled Dad's house sale, price proceeds, split. I knew the layout of his thinking. I had taught him numbers when he was 8 years old, making him calculate change for the ice cream truck. Now he was calculating me. "Mark," I said, keeping my tone even, "you've been planning this for a while." "That's called being responsible," he countered. "We can't sit around until something happens to you." I let the sentence hang there, ugly and unpolished. "Until something happens to you." "Thanks for your concern," I said, my voice as flat as the lemon tree's shadow across the path. "I'll think about it, Dad." But I ended the call before he could sell me my own life in bullet points. The house was quiet again, but the silence had changed shape. It was no longer the stillness of a home in mourning. It was the pause between one blow and the next. I rinsed the coffee down the drain. My hand smelled faintly of the rosemary Helen used to cut for the Sunday roast. She'd hand me sprigs like small trophies. Fresh from the source, she'd say smiling, even though we both knew I'd just been standing there watching her work. The phone rang again. "Laura," this time I considered ignoring it, "but if grief teaches you anything, it's that avoidance doesn't stop what's coming." "Dad," she began. Her voice pitched a little too high the way she spoke when she was trying to make bad news sound like a gift. "Mark and I are on the same page. We both think you both think I should sell the house I finished for her." She hesitated. "It's for the best. You could move in here. We've got the finished basement, a full bath. Mark says we could add a kitchenette. You'd have your entrance, your own space. It's perfect. Perfect." A word too big for 4 walls below ground. And the money, I asked. Well, after we cover the contractor for the basement, you could set some aside. Help with Emily's tuition. Maybe help Mark with his new place. It's all family, Dad. Win-win. Win-win. I could hear the echo of Mark's voice and hers, the rehearsed cadence of people who had already agreed on the ending before asking if I'd read the script. Laura, I said, when was the last time you called me to talk about something other than money? That's not fair, she protested. I've been busy. Emily's in her junior year. Work's been 2 months, I said. It's been 2 months since you called for anything else. Silence brittle and thin. You've been sending Emily money every month? She blurted finally as if it were an accusation. Yes, I said. $500 for 2 years. Another pause. She doesn't need to know that, Laura said. Of course she didn't, because if Emily knew, she might question the stories she'd been told about her grandfather, the fragile old man who couldn't manage his affairs, the one who needed decisions made for him. I need to go, I said. And this time, I hung up before the conversation could turn into something uglier. For a long time, I just stood in the hallway. The late morning light was slanting through the front windows, catching the dust on the console table. Helen's reading glasses were still there, folded neatly on top of a paperback she'd never finish. I reached out, then stopped. Touching them felt like a step I wasn't ready to take. My feet carried me without thinking to her study. The room smelled of lemon oil and the faint trace of her perfume. Something floral, subtle that clung to the curtains. Her desk was exactly as she'd left it, pen resting diagonally across a yellow legal pad, the corner of an envelope peeking from under a stack of papers. I sat in her chair. The leather was worn smooth where her elbows had rested. For the first time in 2 weeks, my shoulders eased. There was a bottom drawer on the left, stiff from years of sticking. I pulled it open. Inside were the usual layers of life-old tax returns, appliance manuals, greeting cards. Beneath them, my fingers found the edge of a pale blue folder. It was heavier than it looked. The paper inside shifted with a faint whisper like it knew it had been waiting for me. I didn't open it. Not yet. I set it on the desk and rested my palm on the cover. A yellow sticky note was stuck to the front. Helen's handwriting in tidy block letters. If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside. I sat there, the late morning light warming the side of my face, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than loss. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was direction. The pale blue folder sat in front of me like an unopened letter from the past. Helen's note stared back at me, those square, deliberate letters that always made even grocery lists feel important. If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside. I hesitated. My fingers traced the paper's edge. Outside, a breeze moved through the lemon tree, scattering sunlight and shifting patterns across the desk. The air smelled faintly of rosemary from the garden, and something about that scent pressed against a memory I wasn't ready to name. When I finally opened the folder, the first thing I saw was a sheath of financial statements. Bank accounts I didn't recognize. Not the joint accounts we'd had for decades, but individual ones, all in Helen's name. One was from a small credit union in another county, another from an online bank I'd never heard her mention. Each had modest sums, $8,400 here, 12 balls to $200 there. Not fortunes, but enough to make me wonder why they'd been kept separate. Under the statements were property documents. My breath caught when I saw the first a deed for a villa in the Algarve region of Portugal purchased 10 years ago. The owner's name, Helen Margaret Hale. No mention of me. I flipped to the next page. A letter from a law firm in Lisbon dated last spring confirming the property's current value and offering to manage a rental contract. Helen had declined in a handwritten note at the bottom. Not yet. Keep private. Private? The words sat there like a pebble in my shoe. There were more documents. Life insurance policies I'd never signed. All naming beneficiaries. I expected Mark and Laura. But one caught my eye. A newer policy, much smaller, with only one beneficiary, Emily. No mention of her parents. I leaned back in Helen's chair. The lemon-scented polish in the wood seemed stronger now, mixing with the metallic taste that had risen in my mouth. Helen had always been deliberate. She didn't forget things. If she'd kept this from me, it wasn't oversight. It was intent. I picked up a smaller envelope tucked into the back of the folder. Inside was a letter dated 2 years ago written in Helen's looping cursive. Richard, if you found this, I'm gone. And if I'm right, the calls have already started. They will circle you, not because they need you, but because they want what you've built. I've watched it for years. Small comments, questions about money, the way they count what isn't theirs yet. You've always given the benefit of the doubt. I stopped doing that long ago. The house is yours. It stays yours. I paid it off so you'd never have to answer to them about it. But I also knew they'd try to make you believe you couldn't manage alone. That's why there's a second plan. The villa in Portugal is for you, but not on paper. You'll find instructions in the back. Follow them if you need to disappear for a while. Sometimes the only way to win is not to play their game. Helen's voice was in my head as I read. Calm, even, not angry, but certain. I turned to the back pocket of the folder. There was a typed page with contacts for the Lisbon law firm, a local caretaker named Anna, and a key taped to the paper. Next to the key was a note in Helen's hand. Trust Anna. She owes me her life. Long story. I let the paper fall onto the desk. My pulse was steady, but my mind was racing. For the rest of the afternoon, I moved through the house like a man walking in two timelines at once. Every object I passed: the framed photo of Mark at his high school graduation, Laura's ceramic vase from college, Emily's crayon drawing of the garden now felt like evidence in a case I hadn't known I was building. In the kitchen, I found myself staring at the spice rack Helen had arranged by height, not alphabet. She'd always said it looked better that way, but now I wondered how many small, deliberate choices had she made that I'd never questioned. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the sink, watching the late afternoon light turn the garden gold. I remembered the last conversation Helen and I had about the kids before she got sick. They love you, I'd said, irritated that she'd been distant with Mark during his last visit. They love the version of me that helps them, she'd replied. The version that says yes. I dismissed it at the time as one of her darker moods. Now, it played back in my mind like a warning I'd ignored. That evening, Mark called again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Dad, just think about what I said. We can make this easy for you. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. Easy for him, maybe. Laura texted an hour later. We'll come by Saturday to talk. Bring Emily. It'll be good to see you. The phrasing wasn't lost on me. Bring Emily. Like I was the guest, not the host. I put the phone face down and went back to Helen's study. The folder was still on the desk. I opened it again, this time studying the insurance policy naming Emily. The date was from last year, well after Helen's diagnosis. She'd made a choice. As the night settled over the house, I turned on the lamp in the study. The warm pool of light caught on the edge of a photograph tucked in the back of the folder. It was of Helen and Emily in the garden, both wearing straw hats, their hands dirty from planting herbs. Helen's arm was around Emily, her smile wide and unguarded. On the back, Helen had written, "Teach her how to keep what matters." I sat with that photograph for a long time. The room was silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the one Helen insisted we keep, even when it ran slow. I thought about calling Emily, telling her everything. But Helen's note said, if you need to disappear, not if you need to explain. This wasn't the time to show my cards. Not yet. Near midnight, I locked the study door for the first time in years. The folder went into the bottom drawer of my desk, not Helen's. The key to the villa went into the small safe behind the bookcase, the one no one but Helen and I knew existed. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the shelf, listening to the quiet house. Somewhere in the darkness, I could almost hear Helen's voice. You don't have to fight the way they expect. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I made coffee, drank it this time, and sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper. I wrote 2 columns, what they know and what they don't. The first list was short. The second was longer than I expected. When the sun finally broke over the garden, I looked at the lemon tree and thought about Portugal, about Anna, whoever she was, about disappearing, not out of fear, but on my terms. For the first time since Helen's funeral, I felt something sharp under the grief. Not anger exactly, but resolve. They thought I was an old man standing on the edge of a cliff waiting to be pushed. They had no idea I'd already built a bridge. Saturday came with a pale winter sun, thin and reluctant, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's holding back. I'd been up since 6 o'clock, walking the garden paths in my coat, feeling the crunch of frost under my boots. By 8, I'd pruned the rosemary, swept the stone steps, and put the kettle on. It wasn't about tidying for them. It was about reclaiming my rhythm before they arrived. At 9:17, the sound of tires on gravel reached me from the drive. I stayed at the kitchen window long enough to see Mark's black SUV ease and the paint so polished it caught the morning light like a blade. Laura sat in the passenger seat, phone already in hand. Emily was in the back, forehead pressed to the glass. I opened the door before they could knock. Morning, I said, keeping my voice even. Emily smiled and ran up the steps first. Hi, Grandpa. She wrapped her arms around my waist. Her hair smelled faintly of the strawberry shampoo Helen used to buy for her. Hey, kiddo, I said, holding her a moment longer than I needed to. Come on in. It's warmer inside. Mark and Laura followed, bringing with them the scent of expensive perfume and cold air. Mark didn't take off his sunglasses until we were in the kitchen. You've been busy, he said, glancing around. Place looks neat. I poured tea into the heavy mugs Helen liked to use for guests. I had time. Laura's eyes swept over the counters, the cabinets, the framed photo of Helen and me on our 25th anniversary. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We thought it'd be good to see you, Dad. And talk. I gestured toward the table. Talk then. They sat across from me side by side like a united front. Emily wandered off to the living room, flipping through a stack of children's books. I could hear the faint sound of pages turning. Mark cleared his throat. Look, Dad, we don't want to drag this out. We found a buyer. Solid offer. More than the place is worth, honestly. It's a chance for you to downsize and not worry about taxes or maintenance. I stirred my tea slowly, letting the spoon ring against the ceramic. I told you there's no mortgage. Taxes are manageable. That's not the point, Laura said, leaning forward. It's about practicality. You don't need all this space. You're alone here. I looked from one to the other. Practicality for me or you? Mark's jaw tightened. You think we're doing this for ourselves? I think you should answer the question, I said. Silence stretched, only broken by the sound of Emily laughing at something in her book. In moments like this, Helen's voice came back to me. You don't have to fight the way they expect. So, I didn't argue. I let the silence do the work. People tend to fill it, and Mark was no exception. It's just we have plans. The offer would let you move somewhere comfortable, maybe near us, and it would free up. He stopped himself, but I knew where he'd been headed. Free up the capital. Laura picked it up. We could help with finding a condo, something manageable, close to Emily. I took a slow sip of tea. What if I'm comfortable here? That's not sustainable, Mark said sharper now. I set my cup down, letting the sound land like a gavel. Do you remember the summer you were 12, Mark? The roof leaked over the east bedroom. I spent 2 weeks fixing it. You and I went up there together. You learned how to lay shingles. Mark frowned. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, I said. Because this house isn't just space, it's work. Work I'm still capable of doing. Laura rolled her eyes just slightly. Dad, you're almost 70. You shouldn't have to. And yet I said I can. I didn't tell them about the folder on my desk. About Portugal. About Helen's letter. That was for later. Emily wandered back in, then holding a drawing she'd made with colored pencils. I drew your garden, she said, handing it to me. I studied it. Bright green rosemary bushes, a yellow lemon tree, and a small blue house in the corner. Helen's study. Emily had even drawn the curtains. It's perfect, I said, smiling. You remembered the color of Grandma's curtains. Emily grinned. Of course. Grandma told me to always draw what's true. Mark shifted in his chair. Why don't you go play in the den? She skipped off. When she was gone, I leaned back. Here's the thing. Helen wanted me here in this house. She made sure I could stay. Paid it off years ago. Laura blinked. Paid it off. I nodded. 6 years ago. Quietly because she didn't want mounted about it. Mark's mouth pressed into a thin line. Why didn't you say that before? Didn't think I needed to, I said. It was a small drop of truth, just enough to shift the ground under them without revealing how deep the foundation went. They stayed another half hour trying to steer the conversation back to logistics, but I let their words drift past me like wind through bare branches. I asked about Emily's school, about Laura's new job and Mark's latest golf scores. Every answer was shorter than the last. When they finally stood to leave, Mark said, just think about it, Dad. The buyer won't wait forever. I'll think, I said, walking them to the door. Emily hugged me again. Bye, Grandpa. I'll come back soon. Anytime, kiddo, I said, and I meant it. After the SUV rolled away, I stood in the doorway, feeling the cold air on my face. Inside, the house was silent again, but it didn't feel empty. In Helen's study, I opened the blue folder and looked at the photograph of her and Emily. Teach her how to keep what matters. I realized then that the real battle wasn't about the house at all. It was about teaching the next generation not to let go of what's worth holding. And the first lesson would be subtle, the kind of move they wouldn't see until it was too late. I picked up the phone and dialed the Lisbon number Helen had left me. When the line clicked, a woman's voice answered. Anna speaking. Anna, I said, my voice steady. Helen Hale was my wife. She told me to call you when the time came. There was a pause on the other end, then a warm accented voice. Then, Mr. Hale, I think we should meet. And soon. I hung up, the echo of her voice still in my ear, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the ground shift, not under me, but for them. They thought they were setting the terms, but the board had just been reset. Anna's voice lingered in my ear long after we hung up, like the warmth that remains in a room after someone kind has just left it. I stood at the kitchen window, the phone face down on the sill, and watched the rosemary shiver in a breeze I couldn't feel. The garden had become my metronome, rosemary. To the left, lemon tree to the right, the flagstones in between like a score I knew by heart. There's a steadiness to things that grow quietly. You can borrow it if you pay attention. I made a list on the yellow legal pad that still smelled faintly of Helen's hand cream. 3 columns this time instead of 2. What they know, What they don't. What I want them to think. The third column mattered. Now, revenge is not an explosion. It's a thermostat. You bring the temperature where you need it, and you let everyone else mistake comfort for control. First call after Anna was not to Mark or Laura. It was to a number in my old Rolodex I hadn't dialed in more than a decade. Peter Alvarez Estates and Trusts. He'd handled a skirmish years back when Helen's aunt died and a cousin appeared with opinions. Peter had a manner I trusted. Unfussy, precise, allergic to drama. Richard, he said when his assistant passed me through, I'm sorry about Helen. Come in this afternoon. Bring whatever she left you to bring. I could hear the soft click of him opening his calendar. The sound made me feel steadier than coffee did. I gathered the blue folder into a messenger bag. Documents nested in documents like the rings inside a tree and locked the study. For the first time since the funeral, I put on a collared shirt I would have called real before all this started. Grief makes sweatpants feel like armor, but armor has its time and place. Today, I wanted to look like a man who still signs his name with a straight line. Peter's office sat in a brick building that used to be a bank. You could tell from the vault door they'd left as decor in the lobby, a reminder that once upon a time people put value behind steel and not in a cloud. His receptionist had kind eyes that didn't ask for anything. She offered water. I said yes out of respect for the ritual. When Peter stepped out, he wore the same navy suit I remembered, the one that looked permanent on him, like an assumption no one had challenged. He didn't hug me. I was grateful. We sat at a conference table the color of old tobacco. I placed the folder between us and flipped it open to the page I wanted him to see first. The deed to the house recorded 6 years ago, my name alone on it. Helen insisted I said and felt my throat threaten me. He nodded businesslike and set his reading glasses lower on his nose. Well, he said softly, scanning quickly but fully, she did this right. He tapped the margin with a pen. Quit claim to your sole ownership recorded notarized. No encumbrances, no lien holders. If anyone's promising anyone a sale without your signature, they're selling air. He kept going. We'll coddle the trust we set up when Mark was still trying to grow a mustache. You remember, he said without looking up. We amended the trust 3 years back. I did vaguely whine on the porch. Helen insisting we do one more pass at the paperwork while the light was nice. She removed the children as presumptive remainder beneficiaries to the real property in favor of a specific bequest to you. They inherit from your estate if and only if you say so. The only non-probate transfer she left outside your discretion is a small life insurance policy set for Emily. He glanced up, then reading my face. That one was important to her. I know I said it hurt less than I expected to say it out loud. He held up a hand the way he does when he's about to ask a question that matters. Has either child attempted to act on your behalf? Represent themselves as having authority. He didn't have to explain what he meant. Power of attorney games, signatures that smelled like entitlement. Mark found a buyer, I said. Came to my door with a letter of intent. I kept my voice dry as a ledger. Peter's mouth made a shape that wasn't a smile. Good. Then let me be clear on 2 pieces of law. He ticked them off like a man laying cards on felt. 1. Without a valid agency document, current signed specific, no one can bind you to anything. 2. Even if you had executed such an agency, you can revoke it unilaterally at any time, and any third party who proceeds after notice does so at their peril. He slid a paper across the table. This is a template letter. We'll put names to it. Realtor, buyer agent. Anyone who sent you a document. Cease from representing you. Future communications in writing only. I read it fast, catching more tone than content. I liked the tone. It was not angry. It was final. And this, he said, placing a second document behind the first, is a notice of non-representation. It says plainly, you have not authorized any person to act on your behalf in the sale of your real property, and any claim to the contrary is fraudulent. I'll file copies with the county recorder and send them certified mail so nobody can pretend they missed it. I appreciate it, I said. The room felt a half-degree cooler, which meant my temperature was settling where I wanted it. He closed the deed and re-entered the folder with a small unconscious gesture I recognized from the last time we were in a room like this. Now, he said, what else is in there? Portugal, I said. He lifted a brow. Not mockery, not surprise, more like the interest of a chess player when a pawn becomes a queen. I turned to the Lisbon letter, the caretaker's name, and the key taped to the inside of the back pocket. I gave him the summary first villa in the Algarve title in Helen's name, instructions to trust Anna. Then the specific, a typed sheet with Portugal Council's contact, and in Helen's handwriting 3 short notes that made a shape: keep private. Use only if necessary. Your life is not a negotiation. Peter leaned forward. Your wife was a very smart woman, he said, and I nodded because truth doesn't require flourish. We'll contact the Lisbon firm on your behalf. Establish your standing as surviving spouse. Confirm title and if necessary effect transfer. He paused, weighing words. Do you want this property to remain discreet? Yes, I said quicker than I'd meant to for now. Then we set up a holding structure, he said, warming into the work. Portuguese council will advise on the right vehicle there. On your side, we can create a revocable trust with a name that doesn't ring bells, something boring. Title the villa to it once Lisbon clears it and keep correspondence through my office. The mailing address we control. You want distance? We can create distance. I like the way he said we. Some words are ropes thrown across water. He made more notes. 2 other items. He held a finger up for each. First, credit freezes for you at all bureaus lifted only by you. Not because I think your children would misuse your information, he added. And we both let the lie pass politely between us, but because weird things happen when word gets around that property is in motion. Second, we take a look at any accounts in Helen's name you were unaware of. If she intended you to have them, and based on what you've shown me she did, then we move cleanly. Otherwise, we leave them where she left them by her design and do not volunteer information no one is entitled to. Quietly, I said. Quietly, he echoed. When we finished signing the letters, his assistant came in with envelopes already addressed, the barcode stickers peeking out. Watching those white rectangles slide across the table felt better than any speech I could have made to my son. The world loves paper. Paper loves procedure. When you can't make people decent, you can make them careful. Back at home, I put the carbon copies in the bottom drawer of my desk, not Helen's. The distinction mattered. Her folder was how we got here. My drawer was what we did with it. The afternoon brought a voicemail from Mark. Dad, call me back. Don't do anything rash. We're trying to make this easy. The word easy again, as if comfort were something that could be used as a leash. I let it sit unturned. A text from Laura followed an hour later. Dinner Tuesday. We can bring takeout. You like that lemon chicken from Whitman's? I typed, sounds good. And didn't send it. Then I typed it again and did. You don't win by being predictable. You win by controlling the clock. I drove to the post office before closing and rented a P.O. box. The woman behind the counter had the patience of someone who has watched thousands of people fumble with forms without learning a single thing. Smallest size, she asked. Medium, I said. And an extra key. There's preparation that looks like paranoia and preparation that looks like a plan. The P.O. box key sat warm in my pocket as I walked out. A small click that translated in my head as options. On the way home, I stopped by the cemetery. I hadn't been back since we put Helen in the ground. It hadn't felt like a place I could get anything done, but there are conversations you cannot have anywhere else. I parked under the gnarled maple and carried nothing with me. Her name on the stone still surprised me in the way a mirror does in bad lighting. I stood there in my good shirt and said nothing for a long time, letting the wind move in the field of flags beside the veterans section like a low applause for people who showed up. When I did speak, it wasn't eloquent. They think I'm soft, I said. They think grief makes me malleable. The air didn't answer, but the ground felt steady, and that was enough. You did most of the hard part. I added softer. Now I'll do the rest. On Monday morning, the certified mail receipts started hitting my tracking app one by one. Broker, buyer's agent, county recorder. A domino line of green check marks that had nothing poetic about them and still felt like poetry. 2 hours later, a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Mr. Hale, this is Greg from Hawthorne really. There seems to be some confusion. Your son indicated I stopped the playback. He didn't realize he'd already said the only part that mattered. I returned the call after lunch and put him on speaker, then set my phone on the counter where I could see the little red dot recording the call because one day you always wish you had. Mr. Hawthorne, I said, there is no confusion. I own my home. Any further contact about listing or sale must be in writing to my attorney. You have his address. Do not come to my door again. Do not speak with my children about my property. He tried to sound conciliatory, but words put into the service of presumption can't help the smell they give off. Of course. We only want what's best for your client, I said. Good day. I sent the audio file to Peter's office with the subject line so dull it might as well have been a traffic report. He wrote back 12 minutes later, perfect. Log. It is a strange relief to have your life translated into administrative verbs. Anna and I spoke that afternoon. Her English had a music I liked, and when she laughed, her voice did a small skip on the second syllable. You're Helen, she said. She saved me once. I didn't ask how yet. The people who deserve your trust will tell you when the timing is right. The house is ready, she added. And I pictured white walls and blue shutters, even though I had not yet seen them. You come, I place fresh linens, lemons in a bowl. You will sleep. Sleep felt like a luxury I had been stealing in small coins. Soon, I said, I need a week. I will wait, she said. Portugal waits well. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and bought a ticket to Faro with a connection through Newark. One way fully refundable, purchased with a card Helen had labeled in our budget as travel if we dare. I used the P.O. box for billing and printed nothing. I took the extra step of turning off my phone's location sharing because the last time I set up my grandson's game console, it surprised me how much these devices like to tell on us. I wasn't hiding. I was simply refusing to be found by people who hadn't asked permission to look. I walked the house that evening with a notebook, not to inventory things, but to listen. Objects talk to you if you let them. The framed photo of Mark at 12 in his missed shirt speaks to the worst impulses that have better stories we could tell if we wanted to. Laura's college ceramics speak to talent, yes, and also to the way she loved praise more than the clay. Emily's crayon garden speaks to a part of the future I'm willing to invest in. I put sticky notes on boxes in the hall closet, not because I planned to ship them yet, but because it calmed a part of me to see instructions I'd given myself to Mark, not a bill to Laura, careful to Emily later. Tuesday morning, the doorbell rang at 9:03. Through the peephole, the realtor again, a second man beside him, older with the look of a person who'd rather be anywhere else. I opened the door only as wide as the chain allowed. Certified letters. I said, "Mean we don't need to do this dance." The older man raised his hands. "I'm your son's attorney," he said, and my lip did a thing I didn't intend. "He asked me to check on you." "Check," I said. "From there." I didn't break the chain. "You received my counsel's notice yesterday." The realtor spoke then, attempting to be genial. "We thought perhaps you hadn't seen." "I see fine," I said. "When you are 65 and still competent, there is a particular satisfaction in saying that without heat. You may leave a card." They did, and I let the cards sit on the console table like two moths, harmless. Unless you forget they eat through fabric when you don't watch them. At noon, Mark called. I answered this time. It felt like a day for letting things reveal themselves. "Dad, what are you doing?" "No." "Hello. Greg says you threatened legal action." "I promised it." I said, different verb. "You're being ridiculous." He snapped. "This buyer is real. This is a good number." "We're trying to who is we?" I asked quietly. He inhaled sharply. "Laura and I, our families. You know what I mean?" "I do," I said. "And that's the problem." There was a silence that told me he was calculating the cost of his next sentence. "If you insist on making this difficult," he said finally, "we have to look at other options. Conservatorships are a thing for a reason." The word slid into the line like a piece of glass in soup. I didn't let it cut me. "That is a serious claim." I said, still even. "Are you accusing me of incapacity?" "I'm saying," he said softer, "now that we can't sit around and wait for you to start making mistakes." "I just made one." I said, "I picked up this call then because I am not interested in being clever so much as being clear. Any further threats will be forwarded to my attorney. We will meet on Thursday at my house at 2. Bring your counsel. I'll have mine. We will talk like adults or not at all." He sputtered, then said yes, because bullies do prefer a schedule if it offers them a chance to wear ties. When I hung up, I walked to the study and opened the bottom drawer where I had placed the blue folder. I took out the small envelope I hadn't touched yet. On the front, Helen had written Independence. Inside was a bank card and a typed slip with a pen, a note in her hand underneath. "You hate allowances. Consider this a dare rather than a gift. Use it to build a life, not to buy time." The audacity of her faith made my eyes ache. I set the card on the desk where the light could catch it and remind me I had a spine. That evening, I changed the deadbolt on the front door. Not because I was afraid, because I like the feeling of a key in a lock that answers to me. I oiled the hinges, tightened the screws in the banister on the back staircase, and replaced the batteries in the smoke detectors, work that seems small until one night it isn't. When the house sighed into the quiet that follows honest labor, I poured a finger of the scotch I had been saving for a celebration I hadn't defined yet, and sat at the kitchen table with nothing in front of me. The absence of paper felt like a decision. Sleep came clean for the first time in weeks. I woke just before 6 to a text from a Lisbon number, Senior Hale. "We have prepared documents to establish you as the sole heir of the property. Please confirm when you are ready to receive the courier," signed with a name I didn't recognize from the letterhead. Paper moving through the world on my behalf while I slept. There are worse lullabibis. I took a walk around the block. No coat, just breathing like mist. An older neighbor, Joyce, waved from her porch and asked after me in a way that did not require an answer. When I reached my front steps again, a small cardboard package sat against the door. No return address, just my name and Mark's quick, impatient handwriting. Inside, a glossy brochure from a condo development. Smiling gay-haired people near a pool, a list of amenities in bullet points, granite counters, a yoga studio, a shuttle to the mall, a note on top. "Thought you'd like to look, love. M." I smiled in a way that did not show teeth and set the brochure under the scotch bottle to level a wobble. Useful after all. Thursday arrived with a sky the color of wet stone. Peter came 5 minutes early, which is to say on time. We sat at the same kitchen table where my children had told me my life no longer fit me. He placed a yellow legal pad on the wood in front of him and wrote the date at the top with a pen that made a nice sound. When Mark arrived with a man, he introduced as our attorney. Jeff. Laura followed a step behind, eyes bright and tired. Emily was not with them. I felt the absence of her like light you didn't know you were using until it was gone. We did not shake hands. Jeff opened with the voice of a person who had made partner by being the most reasonable man in unreasonable rooms. We're here in good faith, he said, to discuss a path forward that honors everyone's interest. He spread his hands in a way that suggested an invisible table where possibility sat. Peter slid the cease and desist across the tangible table. My client's interests are honored when his ownership is respected, he said. This letter restates what your correspondence yesterday acknowledged. He has not listed his home for sale. He has not authorized any person to solicit buyers. Any further effort to do so will constitute tortious interference, and you will be named. Mark's jaw worked, but he didn't speak yet. Laura tried for a smile that felt like an attempt, not the emotion. Dad, we're just trying to think long term. Me, too, I said. And I started thinking long term before you learned to drive, she flushed. Mark couldn't stop himself anymore. Look, he said, leaning forward, palms on the table. You keep the house if that's what you want, but you can't expect us to carry the rest of Carrie, I said gently. What are you carrying? He looked surprised at his words. The burden, he said smaller. The burden of my life, I asked still gentle. The burden of my bills, which you don't pay for. The burden of my choices which you don't make. Or the burden of not getting what you had already counted as yours. He looked at Jeff then as if law might save him from language. It could not. Peter spoke into the quiet. There is also the matter of threats of conservatorship. He didn't look at Mark when he said it, which made the line ring louder. Those statements were recorded and preserved. Should any petition be filed, we will introduce evidence of competency and of attempted financial coercion. Laura's hand flew to her mouth. We would never. She began, then stopped hearing herself. Mark didn't mean I meant. Mark said, eyes hot, that I'm tired of this. You're tired, I said, nodding. I understand. Being told no is exhausting when you've rehearsed yes. We let the quiet sit at the table for a minute. Then I pushed a sheet of paper across to them. It was not what they expected, a simple list written in my neat block letters. Here is what I am doing on my timeline. It had 3 items. 1, I am not selling my home. 2, if I choose to relocate at any point, I will tell you after the decision is made. 3, I will continue to support Emily directly at my discretion. Any attempt to mediate that support through intermediaries ends all support. Laura's eyes glistened. It surprised me it shouldn't have that behind the calculation. There was still a person who could be reached by consequence. Dad, she whispered. Please, I am not the enemy, I said, and felt the truth of it to my feet. But I am not a resource to be managed. Peter collected his pad. Jeff murmured something circumspect about time to digest. Mark stood without looking at me and moved toward the door like the house offended him. Laura lingered. At the threshold, she turned back. Do you have to be so cold? I don't, I said. I choose to be clear. They were gone 3 minutes when my phone buzzed. A Portuguese number. I stepped into the study and closed the door behind me before I answered. Senor Hale, the voice said, friendly, precise. We have courier documents to your postbox. They include confirmation of your status and a temporary letter of authorization for the caretaker to act on your instruction. He paused, then added, we also included information your wife asked us to give you only when you were ready. She was very careful. Thank you, I said. My voice sounded like a man who knew what he would do next. It felt strange and good in my mouth. When I hung up, I stood there with my hand on the back of Helen's chair. My thumb rubbed the place where the leather had worn smooth from years of her leaning in. Paper could not bring her back. Paper could not teach my children what she had tried to teach them before they decided that wanting was the same as deserving. But paper, when thick enough and stamped by the right offices, could hold a boundary while the rest of me did the quieter work of living. On my way to the P.O. box, I passed the condo development from the brochure. The sign out front promised maintenance-free living. I laughed, the sound surprising me. There is no such thing as maintenance-free anything. Either you do the work yourself or someone does it to you. I prefer the kind of work that leaves scuffs on my knuckles and my name on the deed. The post office smelled like cut paper and patience. My key turned smoothly. Inside my box, a yellow slip waited clerk for package. The woman with the kind eyes handed me a flat envelope heavy enough to change a day. Back in my truck, I slid it open with my thumbnail. Stamps from Lisbon winked up at me. I lifted the first document, confirmation in black ink that a small house with white walls and blue shutters across the Atlantic was in the eyes of 2 governments mine to decide upon. Underneath the letter for Anna, her name in print, crisp as certainty. And at the bottom, a note in Helen's hand, a copy of a copy still sure despite the generations of paper between us. If you're holding this, you are not lost. You are choosing. I put the envelope on the passenger seat where she used to ride and drove home slower than usual, as if speed might shake something loose I wanted to keep. In the driveway, I killed the engine and sat a moment. The house looked back at me, old, honest, a place that asked for work, and paid in dignity. I thought about Portugal lemons in a bowl, a terrace where the wind carried the sea. I thought about Emily's drawing and Mark's jaw and Laura's eyes. Then, because a plan is only as good as the step you take next, I picked up my phone and opened a new message to Anna. Arriving soon. Please prepare the house as you would for Helen. I hit send. A second later, as you wish, Senor. I will set out fresh linens and cut lemons. We will wait for you. Some victories are loud. Mine would not be. Mine would sound like paper sliding into files, like keys turning in locks, like footsteps on flagstone at dawn. Mine would look like a man in a good shirt standing on his porch with a package under his arm and no intention of asking permission to live in his own life. I carried the Lisbon envelope inside and set it next to the blue folder on the desk. The two together made a shape I recognized, past and future stacked neatly present in between. I rested my hand on both and let the house be quiet around me. It was the kind of quiet that isn't empty. It was the kind that waits for the next act. The Lisbon envelope stayed on Helen's desk overnight like a quiet lighthouse paper as a kind of light. I didn't open it again before bed. I didn't need to. Knowing it existed changed the way the house sounded when I moved through it. Floorboards that had creaked like complaints now felt like conversations. The furnace kicking on didn't feel like age. It felt like loyalty. A strange thing happens when you stop waiting to be told who you are. The objects that have always been with you finally answer back. Morning brought a sky the color of dish water and the kind of cold that makes coffee taste like a decision. I drank mine standing at the sink. The rosemary was still trimmed the way I'd left it. The lemon tree looked somehow less like an accusation and more like a task. Helen used to say, a life is built from the tasks you stop resenting. I rinsed the mug, set it upside down on the drying rack, and took a legal pad to the kitchen table. This time, the columns were labeled more plainly. What goes, what stays, what travels. What goes ended up looking like a family portrait drawn by a court reporter's shoes from a decade when Mark thought Italian leather could do what consistency couldn't. The butcher block knife set Laura borrowed for a Thanksgiving that kept expanding to include everyone except the people who cooked. Boxes of trophies, ribbons, plaques, the small currencies of childhood we hang on to because the adult currencies turned out to be less certain than advertised. What stayed was blessedly short. The table where the kids' heights were ticked into the wood. The books with Helen's marginalia like small trails through a forest. The piano she never learned to play but loved to polish. What travels was the least complicated list I'd made since all this began. The Lisbon envelope, one suitcase, passports, her photograph from the beach, the year we let ourselves be young for more than a weekend. I called the moving company at 9:02 because 9:00 felt like starting a fight, and 9:30 felt like letting something start me. A man named Rodriguez answered. His voice had the patient sturdiness of someone who had lifted other people's lives into trucks for a living and still believed in returning phone calls. We spoke in specifics. 2 deliveries, 2 addresses, 1 truck one morning. He asked if this was an estate clearance. I told him honestly that it was a correction. He laughed once softly as if to say he understood more than I'd said. You want them to sign? He asked. Yes, I said. And you'll tell them the sender is Richard Hale. Anything else? He asked. Don't be late, I said. Let the timing do some of the talking. He gave me a window between 7 and 9. I said 7 as if the minute could obey me. The rest of the day I spent touching what would go and what would stay. Boxes have a smell when they leave the garage, dust and ambition. I pulled the ones with the right sizes and shapes and started in the bedrooms that hadn't been their bedrooms in 20 years and still managed to insist on being called that. Mark's room first. The posters were gone, but the wall where his bed had been still had faint squares of paint that aged differently where sunlight couldn't reach. I packed his high school yearbooks, the stack of baseball cards he swore would pay for college, the pale blue tie I bought him when he decided to be a man in a suit because being a man in a mirror wasn't enough some days. I found the letter I wrote him on his 18th birthday, the one where I told him courage was mostly showing up when the story wasn't about you. I read it, folded it, and put it on top of his trophies. I didn't add a note. The letter would do its work. Laura's room made a different kind of sound when I opened the closet, something like glass that has remembered being sand. Scarves carefully tied around hangers. A shoe box labeled clay that held more newspaper than art. The piano books from the 6 months she begged to learn and then remembered it's not praise that teaches your fingers to keep going when they don't want to. I wrapped the books in brown paper with the kind of attention you give to a story you're done trying to fix. I put her 7th grade essay, the one where she wrote about wanting to be the person who brings things to the table, on top of the piano books and closed the lid of the box gently. She hadn't meant money when she wrote that. That's the thing about time. It rewrites us if we don't pay attention. In the hallway closet, I found the box with Emily's Christmas ornaments, the glitter-crusted cardboard stars she insisted we keep, even when glitter found its way into everything, even the butter dish. Those didn't go into any shipment. Those went on the what travels list because there are some things you don't surrender to a lesson. The house changed as the boxes filled, not empty or clearer. There is a mercy in choosing what is yours to carry and what is your job to set down. At noon, I drove to the hardware store for packing tape, Sharpies and the particular screws that fit the back plate of the latch on the side door. On my way out, an end cap display of inexpensive safes caught my eye. Little black boxes with codes on their faces, the kind of thing that promises more than it can deliver and still proves useful in a pinch. I bought one, not for jewelry or cash, for copies. People think originals are what matter, but a well-placed copy can save you when the original is in the wrong hands. Back home, I labeled each box like a promise that required no witness. Mark personal return. Laura piano books return. Mark trophies return. Laura Claybach return. The word return calmed me. When someone decides you are a resource, sometimes the most effective response is to give them back what they left behind. You can keep your mouth closed and still make your point if your handwriting is neat enough. At 3, I called Peter's office and told his assistant about the moving truck in the morning. It felt right to let someone on my side know where the furniture would be tomorrow. It's a particular kind of loneliness going to war against people whose Christmas photos still sit on your mantle. Paperwork is not company, but it is companionship of a kind. Before we hung up, I asked for one more letter. This one, a simple memo addressed to whom it may concern, stating that my house was unlisted, not for sale, not subject to any pending transaction. A sentence that would sound boring until someone needed to be bored into leaving me alone. By late afternoon, the winter light had that nickel tone it gets when the day wants to be done before you do. I ran a soft cloth over the table where Helen and I had moved our lives through numbers every December. Tithes, taxes, the small categories we pretended to hate and secretly loved because they proved to us we were still steering something. I set the Lisbon envelope on the table, opened it, and took out the letter for Anna, the one with her name crisp and certain, and placed it into the new safe. Then I made 3 copies of the certificate confirming my status in Portugal, and put them in 3 different places. The safe, the bottom drawer, under a stack of old manuals for appliances we no longer owned, and a manila envelope in the trunk of the car under the spare tire. My father taught me that if you have to hide something, hide it where people are already tired. No one wants to lift a spare tire. At dinner, I boiled pasta and over-salted it. Helen used to say that grief makes you forget the math of the kitchen. I ate it anyway, standing at the counter reading the text from Laura that said, "Tuesday still stands. We can bring lemon chicken," and reply yes. I included a smile I didn't feel because sometimes you let the other side think they're playing a part in your plan. It makes everyone more polite until it's time not to be. I slept in Helen's study on the couch that chalks like something you're not supposed to sit on. Her smell was nearly gone from the room, but the lemon oil stayed honest. The clock ticked. I let it. I woke at 4:52. The house dark and certain around me. Coffee, a shower, a clean shirt. I wrote 2 notes, one for Mark, one for Laura, and sealed them without rereading. They said the same thing in different words. I'm returning what belongs to you. I'm keeping what belongs to me. The difference between the two is not up for debate. I didn't sign them with love. I didn't sign them with anything. Names can be demands. Today, I preferred statements. At 6:41, I turned on the porch light and watched frost steam from the grass like a promise being kept. At 6:57, the truck turned onto my street, a white cab, a rectangle of a trailer that made a rectangle of a morning. Rodriguez hopped out at exactly 7 in a jacket that had moved other people's furniture through other people's winters. "Mr. Hale," he said, and shook my hand with a grip that suggested he appreciated the difference between a job and a favor. Behind him, 2 men in wool caps waited with dollies like horses waiting for reins. "You have the addresses?" I asked. He patted his chest pocket. "Briar Ridge first, then Pine Avenue. And the instructions," he smiled without teeth. "Deliver to the door. Ask for a signature. If they won't sign, take a picture. Send time-stamped. Your name on the note." "Thank you," I said. He looked past me into the house, not nosy, just curious the way a craftsman is curious about the room he'll be judged by. "You want us to take anything else?" he asked, casual as if offering a last cigarette. "Not today," I said. They worked efficiently the way people do when what they're moving weighs pounds. Boxes out of rooms that had waited too long to be honest about what they were. The piano bench, Laura's name scrolled on the bottom from the day we let her make everything hers to encourage her to keep trying. Mark's leather jacket from 1999 wrapped in tissue that should have been humility and wasn't. The trophies, the tie. The shoe box was more newspaper than clay. I watched without hovering. A man who watches too closely makes other men rush. A man who pretends not to care invites something to be dropped. I stood where I could see everything without appearing to see everything, which is a skill fathers learn when they're tired of being told their eyes are controlling. At 7:31, Rodriguez asked for the first signature from me, a receipt confirming the boxes the way a courtroom confirms a sentence. I signed and printed my name and added the addresses next to them in a neat hand. The paper made a satisfying drag under my pen. Some mornings give you that much. When the truck doors were closed, Rodriguez touched the brim of his cap in a gesture that belonged to another decade and made this one feel less cheap. "We'll be careful," he said. "We'll be respectful." "Respect is a good word," I said. "It costs less than people think and buys more." He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else and decided against it. "That's another kind of respect." They pulled out at 7:39. The streets swallowed their sound before the frost had finished its steam. I poured a second coffee and let the kitchen absorb the new shape of the day. The house didn't feel smaller without the boxes. It felt truer. I put the notes to Mark and Laura into separate envelopes and addressed them in my careful print. I tucked Laura's into the top box labeled piano books so she'd see it before she saw the title of the song she never learned to finish. I tucked Mark's into the jacket collar because finding a letter in a place you put your mouth makes it harder to lie to yourself about what you just read. At 8:12, my phone buzzed. A photo from Rodriguez Mark's porch. The stack of boxes on the mat. The note in my handwriting visible like a signature you can't deny. The timestamps lined up like teeth. He wrote nothing else. He didn't have to. 4 minutes later, another photo. Laura stooped the piano bench with the box on top, her storm door's reflection catching a woman's silhouette shaped like a decision she wasn't ready to make. The caption has a single check mark. I set the phone face down and let the thought land. This is what it looks like when you give people exactly what they asked for and they discover that wanting is not the same as deserving. I cleaned the counter where the boxes had rested, streaks where cardboard had learned the shape of our house, and put the Lisbon envelope back into the safe, turned the dial, and listened for the click that told me the tumblers respected the numbers I'd given them. At 8:33, the doorbell rang. I knew the height of the knock before I looked through the peephole. Mark's knuckles make a sound like someone testing a wall. I left the chain on, opened the door the width of a father's patience, and met eyes I'd watched blink open the day he was born. "What is this?" he demanded and held up his phone with the picture of his steps as if it were a verdict and not a photograph. "That," I said, "is your life being returned to you?" He barked a laugh. "So you think you're clever?" "Not particularly," I said. "But I'm awake." He put his hand on the door as if pressure could change hinges. "Open this," he said. I did. I said and didn't. "You had my childhood things delivered to my house. You think this is what this is, petty dad?" "I think it's accurate," I said. "Things that belong to you should be at your house." He cursed softly the way men do when they're not ready to be the man they think they are. "This is insane." "Insane would be signing a paper I didn't read because my son told me reading was a waste of time," I said evenly. "Insane would be moving into a basement because the adults at a dinner I wasn't invited to decided I was a risk factor that could be mitigated with a kitchenette." His jaw clicked. I could see the argument he'd rehearsed this morning go off its rails. He regrouped, pulled out a paper, the letter of intent folded and unfolded enough to look tired. He pushed it through the gap so that it bent against the chain. "This is a good offer. You're being stubborn to prove a point." "There are points worth proving," I said. "What?" "That you can't be told what's best for you." "Congratulations." Message received. His mouth made a line I recognized from every game he lost when he was 7. "Do you realize how selfish this is?" "Selfish?" I repeated. Not because I needed clarity, but because sometimes the echo of a word shames it into being honest. "We're trying to help you," he said, louder now volume. Always the last tool of a man who has run out of others. "Laura and I had a buyer lined up before I finished my coffee." I said, "Yes, I noticed." He took a breath that tried to be a reset. "Where are you going?" "Inside," I said. "You can call me at 2. I'll be available until 3. "Dad, 2 to 3, I repeated and closed the door in a way that didn't slam. The chain fell back against the jamb with a small sound that felt like a punctuation mark. He stood on the porch for the length of a pride, then left. His tires made a statement against the pavement that the street ignored. When his car turned the corner, the house relaxed in a way houses do when the person breathing on them has stopped trying to make them smaller. At 9:05, Laura called. I answered. "Dad," she said, and the word cracked. "What are you doing returning?" "What belongs to you?" I said. "They're just boxes," she said. But she had never been able to say just without swallowing glass. "They're reminders," I said. "And you don't have to keep them. You can throw them away. That's part of the lesson, too." "Please don't be cruel," she said. "I'm not," I said, and knew it was true. "I'm being economical." She was quiet long enough to make me think she'd hung up. Then Emily saw them. She asked me why her piano books were on the porch. What should I tell her that they're hers? I said, and that learning to finish something is sometimes slower than wanting to. That's not fair, she said. And there it was again, the word people use when an outcome refuses to match their intention. Fairness, I said, is a longer conversation than we have today. I didn't hang up on her. I let the call end the way a swing ends when you stop pushing at motion, deciding not anger. When the line went quiet, the kitchen sounded bigger. The clock in Helen's study sounded closer. Before noon, I drove to the bank. I moved a modest sum from the joint account Helen and I had used for groceries into the travel account with the card she called a dare. I left the balances otherwise undisturbed. There's a wisdom in not making the numbers dance just because you've learned a new step. I stood in line behind a man depositing cash with his hat in his hand and in front of a woman arguing with a teller about a fee she had probably agreed to and never read. The bank smelled like old carpet and counterfeit pens. I signed where the clerk told me to sign and left with my copy, which mattered to no one but me and therefore mattered the most. On the way home, I stopped at the post office to check the box. Inside a smaller envelope from Lisbon with my name in the kind of ink that doesn't smear. I didn't open it in the parking lot. Not everything needs to be eaten hot. I slid it into the glove compartment with the manual for a car I no longer trust to tell me the truth about its oil light. At home, I put the envelope next to its older brother on the desk, and stood with my hands on either side of the wood palms, flat fingers spread like a man measuring something he intends to build. The plan had shifted from paper to physical. The boxes had moved. People had been forced to carry parts of themselves they had assumed I would keep holding. The next pieces would be quieter airline confirmations tucked where they couldn't be found by anyone looking for me on a shared family plan. Utilities scheduled for a future that did not require me to announce a forwarding address. Keys duplicated not because I'm worried about being locked out, but because being locked in is a different kind of trap I have no intention of entertaining. At 159, the phone rang. Mark on time because even pride respects an appointment if it thinks it might get something out of it. 2 to 3, I said. He exhaled through his teeth. You've made your point. Not yet, I said. But I'm on schedule. What do you want? He asked. And finally, it was a question. I want to live in my house until I choose not to, I said. I want you to stop treating my no as a phase. I want your realtor to stop treating my address like a line item. I want you to learn the difference between help and control. He let the silence do a little work then. And if I can't, you will. I said because the alternative is smaller than even you want it to be. What does that mean? Suspicion is just fear in business casual. It means courts. I said it means transcripts. It means recordings that sound worse in a courtroom than they did on my kitchen speaker. It means a judge asking you why you threatened conservatorship for a man who can quote his mortgage payoff date and the interest rate of his annuity from memory. You recorded me. He snapped. I preserved a conversation, I said. Because one day you always wish you had. I didn't raise my voice. He didn't lower his. But something in his tone lost a layer of certainty. So what now? Now I said we don't talk about the house again. When you have something to discuss that isn't about its square footage, you call me on a Sunday after church and ask me if I'd like to meet you for pie. Not because you think I need sugar, because you want to hear about the garden. He scoffed, but not with his whole mouth. Pie? Yes, I said. The kind that takes patience and pays you back slice by slice. We're done here, he said. For now, I said, and let the call end like a porch swing again. In the quiet that followed, I packed the one suitcase I trusted. Socks that know the shape of my feet. 2 shirts that don't make me look like a man trying to be less old than he is. The shaving kit Helen gave me on our 20th anniversary was because she liked the smell of sandalwood. The photo of her on the beach is somehow still warmer than the sun will ever be on my face again. The passport, the card she called a dare. I left the suitcase open on the bed in the guest room and went downstairs to the garden. The rosemary has been pruned. The lemon tree will always need something. I cut 3 lemons anyway, set them in a bowl on the counter, and wrote a note to myself on the legal pad. Lock back door. Water basil. Leave keys with Joyce in an envelope marked mail. Practicalities are how men like me tell ourselves we're not dreaming when we're finally doing the thing we've been threatening to do. The doorbell rang again at 4:11. I knew the weight of these footsteps lighter quicker the sound of someone still hoping the conversation could be turned into something without sharp edges. Laura alone. I opened the door all the way because there are moments when you give someone the dignity of access, even if you don't give them the thing they came for. She stood on the porch with the box of piano books in her arms and the note on top like a sunburn she hadn't expected. I can't take this, she said and lifted the box like proof. You already did, I said. Tears threatened the edges of her eyes the way weather threatens a picnic. Don't do that, she said. Don't do what? Turn everything into a line that sounds good, she said. Just her voice broke. Just tell me what you want me to learn. She had been my daughter for 37 years, and this was the first time she asked me that question without expecting the answer to be a ladder she could climb to wherever she had already decided she was going. I exhaled through my nose and felt something in my chest make room for something that wasn't anger. Keep what's yours, I said. Stop asking other people to store it for you. Don't confuse access with love. And if you want to be the person who brings things to the table, I nodded at the box practice by carrying your own to the car. She blinked, surprised I knew where that line came from. Then she held the box tighter and to her credit didn't ask for help down the steps. When she reached the bottom, she turned. Are we going to see you? Yes, I said. When I decide, I'll tell you. And when I say Sunday and pie, I'll mean it. She half laughed, half cried. Pie, she said, as if the word could hold everything we had failed to make of other words. Drive safe, I said, and close the door softly, the way you do when you've learned that loud doesn't add anything except echoes. In the evening, as the house folded itself into the moth-colored light that makes a man honest, I walked the rooms one more time. I touched the table where the tick marks measure height. I straightened the photograph of Helen on the mantel, not because it was crooked, but because it made me feel like I could be useful to her in one last way. I locked the front door, left the porch light on, and set the Lisbon envelope back on the desk where it could shape the air while I slept. Tomorrow would be the first day my children woke up with parts of themselves on their floors instead of mine. Tomorrow would be the day I bought lemons in a place where the lemons had not learned my grief. Tomorrow would be another day in a life I chose. For now, it was enough to stand in my kitchen with clean counters and a bowl of fruit and a plan that didn't need anyone else's permission to be real. By the time Saturday rolled around again, the house had learned my new quiet. It wasn't the hush of morning anymore. It was the hush of a plan that had moved from paper to muscle. The boxes were gone. The table was clear. The Lisbon envelope sat in the safe like a Lowenber steady heat. No smoke. At 8:03 a.m., a text from Mark blinked onto the screen. We're coming by at 10. Don't make this difficult. I typed nothing. I brewed coffee and watered the basil Helen had coaxed through 3 winters like stubborn hope. I put lemons in a bowl on the counter because Anna's message had made that small ritual feel like practice. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote 3 lines on the legal pad. 1. Breathe first. 2. Ask questions they don't want to answer. 3. Make them hear each other. The trick with family isn't volume, it's acoustics. At 9:59, I heard the familiar impatience of tires on gravel. Mark's SUV carries its weather with it. I opened the door before they could knock. He came in first, shoulders pitched forward, jaw set tight. Laura followed, cheeks pink from the cold lips pressed like she was holding something in that might break her teeth if it got out. No, Emily. The absence felt like a draft. Morning, I said. We need to settle this. Mark didn't sit. He paced the length of the rug like a man measuring a field for a fence that would be taller than the deed allowed. Coffee? I asked, because offering hospitality to people who have rehearsed hostility has a way of knocking the script out of their hands. No, he snapped. Yes, please, Laura said, and the words surprised her mouth. I poured her a cup. She stared at the steam as if it might tell her what to say next. I took my seat and let the chair make its honest creak. You said settle, Mark. That presumes a dispute. Let's be clear about what yours is. The house, he said, as if the 2 words could congeal into law. You can't keep it. It isn't. It isn't reasonable. There is no mortgage, I said again. Because repetition is sometimes obedience and sometimes a mirror. Taxes, maintenance, safety, he fired back rapidly. It's not sustainable. He leaned on the phrase like a handrail that had held his weight before. Laura's voice arrived softer. Dad, we're worried about you falling, about you being alone. You're worried about the house being mine, I said. Those aren't the same worry. Mark stopped pacing. We found another buyer, stronger number. We have a letter of intent. You had, I said, and slid Peter's certified mail receipt across the table like a chess piece. Your buyer has been notified that any further contact goes through counsel. There will be no sale. This is ridiculous, he said. You're forcing us to say what you want out loud, I said calmly, which is why you're angry. He stared at me, and for a flicker, I saw the 7-year-old, who hated that the bat was heavy, but hated more when I helped hold it. He pivoted to new ground. If you won't be practical, we'll petition for conservatorship. Laura flinched. She hadn't known he'd bring that word into this room again. She set her coffee down too carefully. Then petition, I said, and my voice surprised all 3 of us with its evenness. You'll discover that judges prefer facts to feelings. Bring evidence. We'll bring recordings. Mark's mouth opened and closed. He didn't like the sound of himself when he wasn't the one playing the call back. Laura tried to catch the rope before he fell further. We don't want to do any of this, she said. We want you safe. We want you close. In the basement, I said. In our home, she said, a plea underneath the performance. In your basement, I repeated. Let's be precise. Silence stretched just long enough to make the next sound count. I reached for my phone, set it in the center of the table, and tapped the speaker icon. We should include Emily, I said. She belongs in any conversation about her tuition and my house. Laura's hand shot out. Don't drag her into this. She's already in it, I said. She just doesn't know which part of the story is true. Mark huffed. She's in class. It's Saturday, I said and dialed. The ring sounded larger in the room because nobody breathed. Hi, Grandpa. Emily answered on the second ring, the bright morning in her voice. I was just about to call you. Mom said, hey, Em, I said gently and looked at Laura, who looked down. I've got your mom and your Uncle Mark here on speaker. We're at my kitchen table. I wanted us to talk together. Oh, she said, the vowel changing shape as it moved through her. Okay, how's school? I asked, because I have learned that starting with the non-essential is often the only way to keep a bridge from burning before anyone crosses it. Fine, she said. And then because she is not yet old enough to have forgotten hard utility asked. No, I said. Then why are we talking about it? She said, and it was so clean and so simple that Laura's hand went to her mouth as if she could keep a sound from escaping that had already escaped. Because we're helping your grandpa think through. Mark started and I raised a hand. He couldn't see but felt. Emily, I said, have you gotten my monthly transfers? Quiet. Then what? The $500 I've been sending you since freshman year, I said. Every month you get them right. Silence lay between us with weight. What money? She said, so small. I wanted to stand up and find a way to rewire time. I didn't look at Laura yet. I kept my eyes on the bowl of lemons because they were honest. Your account that ends in 3,842, I said, direct deposit on the second business day of each month. Emily's breath hitched in my kitchen like she was the one sitting at this table. Mom told me that was she stopped. The sentence had nowhere to go. I thought that was them helping. I wanted you to have what you needed without having to ask. I said, books, dues, whatever made school feel less like a fight. Mark's palm slapped the table. Dad, this is exactly why we needed to have this conversation together, I said, not looking at him. On the other end, Emily made a sound that was ugly and human and made the whole room lean. Mom, Laura closed her eyes. Emily, weak? She looked at me, then pleading not to be made to say it. For once, I let the silence be a mercy, not a tool. My transfers add up to 12,000, I said quietly into the phone. 24 months, 500 at a time. It's not everything. It's not nothing. Emily started to cry. Not the performative kind that asks for a camera, but the kind that leaks out of your actual body when a story breaks open and light rushes into a room that's been closed too long. I'm so sorry, she said breathless to a person she had thought she knew. Grandpa, why didn't you tell me? Your mother asked me not to, I said. She said it would complicate. Complicate who? Emily asked. Complicate what? No one answered her because no one could answer her without changing their shape themselves. I looked at Laura, not to punish, but because the person who needs to speak should be the one who made the speech necessary. She met my eyes like a student who has finally realized the exam is not multiple choice. I didn't want you to, she swallowed, to feel like you owed him. I wanted you to think you wanted credit, Emily said through tears, merciless in the way truth is when it's still read. You wanted me to keep calling you a hero. Laura's face folded. Emily, baby, no. I wanted control, I said softly, because it is sometimes a kindness to name the thing that is eating everyone's time. Mark stood, couldn't find a place to put his height, and sat again. This is not how we do this, he said to no one who could help him. You don't solve this on a phone call. You started it on a phone call, I said. Not unkind. Emily sniffed hard. Grandpa, are you okay? I looked out at the lemon tree and watched a small winter bird land on a branch like punctuation. I'm fine, Em. You don't sound fine, she said. I sound decided, I said. There's a difference. She inhaled like she was going to decide in front of all of us. I'm coming over. No, Laura said too fast. Yes, I said calm. But not today. Today you go for a walk. You buy yourself something hot that does not come with a grade. Then you call me tomorrow when the world is less loud inside your head. She surprised me by listening. Okay, she whispered. I love you. I love you too, I said, then added, because it mattered for your company, not your report card. The line clicked off. The room felt larger because the truth had taken up the space it was owed. Laura pressed her palms to her eyes, the way people do when they think darkness will rearrange the furniture. I didn't mean to. She stopped because the rest of that sentence knows it is a lie. I thought if she knew, it would change how she looked at you or how she looked at me. I wanted to protect your story, I said gently. You wanted to protect the version where you fix everything. Mark found his footing in anger again. It's the floor he trusts most. So this is the plan. Humiliate us. Make us the villains. Keep the house and your pride. You done? Yes, I said with that part. Here's what comes next. I slid a single sheet across the table, the same list I'd shown them with the lawyers written again in my hand. Because there is power in watching a man write the rules he intends to follow. 1. I am not selling my home. 2. I am not moving into your basement. 3. I will support Emily directly as I see fit. If that support is interfered with or misrepresented, it ends. Laura flinched at the last line like it had teeth. Please, she said. Just that word. It's a better word when it arrives before the problem. I'm not your enemy, I said, and watched it either land or not. Mark pushed away from the table and stood so fast his chair bit the rug. He looked at the lemons as if they'd insulted him. Congrats, he said. You win. This isn't a game, I said. Everything is, he said, and walked to the door. Mark, I called. He stopped. When you talk to your realtor again, tell him to stop sending letters to my porch. My porch is for people who know my first name. He left without answering. Silence closed behind him like a well-oiled door. Laura stayed. The coffee had cooled into a mirror she didn't like. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. And for the first time, I believed her. She wasn't angling. She was tired. You won't, I said. Not today. Maybe not by yourself. She nodded small as if agreeing with gravity. Dad, are you going somewhere? Yes, I said. Not today. Not to a basement. Her eyes searched my face for a hint I would not give her. The plan requires respect for its privacy. Will you tell me when? When I'm ready, I said. And when I do, it won't be a negotiation. The wind picked up outside. The lemon tree made a soft shiver on the glass like a hand. She stood. Can I come by tomorrow with Emily? Yes, I said. But you leave money at the door. We talk like people who love each other, not like accountants. A small smile found a corner of her mouth. Pie, she said, trying the word on like a dress she wasn't sure she could afford. Pie, I said. Sunday. After she left the house, exhaled. I collected the cups and washed them slowly, paying attention to the way the ceramic changes sound when the coffee leaves it. I dried them and put them back on the shelf in their spots, the same spots Helen had chosen. The small obedience of returning things to where they belong felt like a prayer, I believed. At noon, a new voicemail, the realtor an apology shaped like a threat. We didn't mean to cause stress, Mr. Hale, but if you reconsider this market, I deleted it. Peter texted. All notices delivered. No further contact except written. Good work today. I put the phone face down again, not to avoid the world, but to give this house the courtesy of my undivided presence. I walked the rooms once more with unhurried steps. Helen's study. The chair where her elbows had made their permanent hollows. The legal pad with my morning's list. I wrote one more line at the bottom. 4. Choose when to leave. Leave like a gentleman. It would not be an exit under the cover of shame. It would be a departure at the hour of my choosing, announced with the dignity of a man who had built a life in full and was not finally asking permission to keep it. Late afternoon I called Anna. She answered on the second ring like people do who mean what they say about being available. Seen her soon, I said. I will open windows, she replied as if that were the most important job in the world. Maybe it was. Fresh linens, I said, because saying the words made the picture in my head turn from watercolor to oil. And lemons, she said. Always lemons. Always, I echoed. We hung up with no ceremony. Old grief teaches you that large feelings don't require large performances. Twilight pressed its forehead to the windows. I set 2 plates on the counter and made a small dinner for one. I ate slowly, not because the food deserved it, but because my life did. I rinsed the plate, dried it, and set it in its place. The TV stayed off. The clock ticked in honest seconds. I sat a while with the blue folder open to Helen's note. If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside, even though I now know more than the note had told me. I placed my hand on it like a benediction. Thank you. I didn't say it out loud because some thank yous are better kept between skin and wood. Before bed, I wrote 2 emails. One to Peter confirming I'd be unreachable for a few days starting midweek and authorizing him to field all communications with the Kids Council. The second to Joyce next door asking if she'd collect the mail for a spell and water the basil if the week ran dry. I set aside the spare keys in an envelope labeled Joyce Mail and Basil and tucked it into the drawer by the front door. Practicality is the bow you tie on clarity. In the dark, I lay awake long enough to hear the house settle. A soft tick in the vent. The particular sigh the east wall makes when the temperature drops. Somewhere beyond the windows, a fox moved through the sleeping yards like a rumor. I thought about Emily's breath catching through the speaker. I thought about Laura asking, "What do you want me to learn?" I thought about Mark's jaw and how a man can wear it like armor and still be pierced by a single quiet sentence. When sleep finally came, it wasn't a bargain. It was a right. Morning would bring PO and Sunday and maybe a small conversation where a girl became a woman by telling the truth to herself in front of people who loved her. Soon after would come a ticket, a bag, a door closed behind me. That wasn't about leaving so much as it was about arriving. For now, the bowl of lemons, the legal pad with 4 lines, and a house that had made room for the next chapter without needing to watch me write it. Mark had always carried himself like the world would bend for him if he just leaned hard enough. That confidence, arrogance, if you stripped away the polish, wasn't built on discipline or skill. It came from never having to face the real cost of failure. Helen and I had seen to that. I'd seen to it, thinking it was what fathers were meant to do. Now in my kitchen, I watched that confidence begin to fray. It started small. A missed payment notice on his truck loan, one of those oversized pickups he never used for work. Then a call from his golf club reminded him that his membership dues were 2 months overdue. I didn't have to be the one who pulled those threads. I just had to stop holding them together. 2 weeks earlier, I'd quietly closed a joint account Helen had opened in both our names years ago. One Mark didn't even know existed until recently. Or rather, one he thought no one monitored closely. He'd been using it for temporary cash flow. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. Always with the promise to put it back. I never asked for repayment because Helen had insisted we let it go. It's just money, she'd say, brushing off my protests. But money has a way of teaching lessons words never can. When Mark discovered the account was gone, he didn't call me directly. He called Laura. And Laura, ever the diplomat when she wanted something, called me. Dad. Mark stressed. That account wasn't yours to use, I said. She hesitated, then shifted her tone to something softer, almost pleading. You know, he's been under pressure. The market's been bad. Just if you could help him get through the next few months. I could almost hear Helen's voice in hers, Helen, when she wanted me to back down in an argument. But Laura's voice lacked Helen's warmth. It was a tone learned, not lived. Laura, I said, pressure is not a bad thing. It keeps the pipes from freezing. She didn't reply right away. I imagined her on the other end working through what I just said. She wouldn't get it. Not yet. Meanwhile, Graham had been busy. He'd found that a property Helen and I co-owned with an old friend, one Mark assumed would pass to him, had a clause buried in its partnership agreement. If either party sold its share, the other had the first right of refusal. Graham made sure that other party now included me exclusively, and then we quietly sold my share to a buyer for cash. By the time Mark realized the asset was gone legally and cleanly, that sale funded something else. Something I kept locked in the bottom drawer of Helen's desk, a portfolio of municipal bonds in Emily's name. No one but Graham and I knew. Not Mark, not Laura, and especially not the kind of friends Mark kept around when he wanted to look important. One afternoon, Mark showed up at the house. No call ahead. Just his truck and the driveway engine running while he stood on the porch, shifting from one foot to the other. I let him ring the bell twice before I opened the door. Dad, we need to talk. I stepped aside and he walked in without waiting for an invitation. He scanned the living room, the kitchen like he expected to find stacks of cash lying around. You closed the account, he said. Yes. You know that put me in a tight spot. I do. His jaw worked. I thought after Mom that you'd inherit a blank check. I let the question hang. Mark took a breath like he was about to argue, but then he let it out and dropped into one of the kitchen chairs. You've got no idea what it's like out there right now. Costs are up, jobs are down. I've got responsibilities.
So do I said.
We sat there for a long moment, the sound of the refrigerator filling the space between us. He left without shaking my hand. Later that week, Laura's catering business lost its biggest corporate client. Officially, they decided to bring services in-house. Unofficially, Graham had overheard at a Chamber of Commerce lunch that a new caterer, a quieter, more reliable one, had been recommended by someone with influence in the right circles. Influence, it turned out, that I'd spent years building. I didn't take pleasure in watching them stumble. Not in the way most people think of revenge. There was no gloating, no victory dance, just a quiet satisfaction in the rebalancing of things. For years, they'd assumed I was an endless source, a tap that could be turned on whenever they were thirsty. Now the handle was gone, and they were left staring at the dry spout. Emily came by on Saturday. She didn't mention her parents, and I didn't bring them up. We spent the afternoon in the garden pruning the rosemary, picking lemons for Helen's old pie recipe. She asked if I'd teach her how to fix the loose hinge on the shed door, and I showed her. She picked it up faster than I expected. You've got a steady hand, I told her. Guess it runs in the family, she said with a smile. When she left, she hugged me tighter than usual. And for a moment, I thought about telling her everything about the bonds, the sales, the plan. But I didn't. Not yet. Because the next move wasn't about her. It was about showing Mark and Laura what life looked like without a safety net. And the thing about safety nets is most people don't realize they're there until they're gone. The unraveling had begun, and I had all the time in the world to let it play out. Airports are designed to make you feel interchangeable. That's their trick, their mercy, their insult. 1,000 moving parts all humming to the same hour, and you are just another carry-on with shoes in a bin. Newark smelled like pretzels and disinfectant. The gate agent smiled the way you smile at an assembly line. I handed over my passport and watched the scanner confirm I existed. On the plane, I took the aisle. I used to take the window when Helen and I flew together. She liked the horizon to make sense beneath her. The neat geometry of fields and neighborhoods and rivers braided like hair you didn't want to cut. Alone, the aisle feels honest. A small mercy you can stand when your blood insists. I didn't talk to the man beside me. He had the earnest face of a traveler who wants to confess his itinerary to a stranger so the world will confirm his good choices. We exchanged nods and he blessed us both by opening a book. I closed my eyes and tried the shape asleep. It fit for a while. In the stretch of darkness over the Atlantic, the cabin lights dimmed to a hush and the plane became a congregation. A row of people in permissioned ignorance. We do not know the pilot's heart rate. We do not know what winter does to metal at this height. We do not know how the engines keep insisting. And yet the insistence holds. That's belief with a timetable. Somewhere above the ocean, I thought of Emily at the kitchen table, the sound her breath made when a story broke open. I thought of Laura on the porch with a box of her piano books of Mark's knuckles against my door. The way pride makes a dull percussion. I thought of Helen writing her tidy block letters on a sticky note and trusting me to read. When the flight attendant asked if I wanted breakfast, I told her no. She leaned in anyway and set a cup of coffee on my tray. "You look like a man who drinks the coffee," she said with a kindness that wasn't performative. I did. It was terrible. It helped. Faro arrived under us with white squares and blue glints, a mosaic you could live inside. The runway was a strip of certainty between two doubts, and the tires took it like a promise they intended to keep. The plane exhaled. So did I. Customs was a line of people practicing patience in different languages. When it was my turn, the officer, a young man with an old face, stamped my passport and said, "Bevendo." It is a quiet sort of welcome when the stamp hits paper. Proof on 2 pages that you've crossed something invisible and been allowed. Outside the sliding doors, the Algarve air had the temperature of a good handshake, cool at first, warm a second later. A woman stood a few yards away holding a piece of paper with my name printed in capital letters as if someone had spelled me. She was compact hair tucked into a low knot, a navy sweater that didn't announce itself. When she saw me see her, her whole face changed shape, less like a smile and more like the return of something she hadn't known she had misplaced. "Senor Hale," she said and stepped forward. "Anna," I said. She didn't hesitate, and I was grateful for it. She hugged me as if it were not rude to do so in a place where travelers are supposed to be neutral. Her shoulders smelled faintly of oranges and laundry. "You're Helen," she said when she let me go. "Would be angry if I did not welcome you this way." Angry and Helen in the same sentence made me laugh. She'd pretend to be, I said, and then later she'd say it out loud like a prayer. Anna nodded as if she'd been in our kitchen when those small liturgies were invented. "Come," she said, and led me toward a small car the color of a cloud that means rain, but decides against it. We drove without wasting sentences. The highway offered small hills and big sky. White houses were scattered on the slopes like thought-out decisions. Here and there a ruin held its shape out of respect instead of strength. Anna pointed out when pointing mattered. "There," she said at one roundabout, "fresh bread in the mornings at another pharmacy. You will not need, but it comforts to know." When we left the main road and the pavement narrowed into something that made you pay attention, she slowed. "Olive trees," she said, as if they were people I should meet properly. "The old ones, remember?" We turned into a lane with stone walls the height of a good boundary. Bougainvillea poured over them like the kind of purple that makes you excuse extravagance. When she stopped, she did it with the unshowy confidence of someone who always arrives where she means to home, she said, and looked at me, not to gauge my reaction, but to share it. The house was smaller than my American house and bigger than the one I had tried to shrink. White walls, blue shutters that made the light honest, a red tile roof that had learned to hold its tongue in storms. It wasn't a showpiece. It was a place that had been asked to be a place and had answered yes. Anna took a key from her sweater pocket and placed it in my hand with 2 fingers. The key was brass, warm, heavy for its size. "This is yours," she said. "In law and in what matters." I didn't say thank you, not out of rudeness, because some thanks should be saved for when you can keep them. Inside, the floor was cool under my shoes. The living room opened to light without asking permission. A simple couch the color of sand. A wooden table with 4 chairs meant 4 people could eat and mean it. Built-in shelves that hold books. A small kitchen tiled in blues that repeated the sea's ideas. Copper pots hung above the stove in a way that made work look like art and art look like work. A bowl sat on the counter with lemons that knew what they were doing. Anna moved around the rooms with the soft theater of a good host, not to show off but to make knowing easier. Linens, she said, gesturing to a closet that smelled like sun. New mattress, she added, tapping the edge of a bed that seemed to forgive the bodies that had already slept in it. Windows, she said, and open one so the air could behave the way air does when you tell it the truth. A small terrace waited beyond the kitchen stone underfoot. Iron rail painted the kind of blue you get, only by not hurrying. Past the railing, the Mediterranean said all the things it always says, even to people who don't listen. I stood there and let it be a language I hadn't studied and could still understand. Keep moving. Keep changing. Keep showing up. Anna placed a hand flat on the table the way you steady a child and then let go. The law firm in Lisbon sent confirmation. She said, I collected it yesterday at the post office as we arranged. It's in the drawer. We can sign where the arrow points. I know the arrows. No Cyprio coupe. She smiled at my face. Do not worry, she translated, even though she knew I had understood. I opened the drawer. The envelope was the legal sort that takes itself seriously. Inside stamped signatures a tidy Portuguese explanation that a house is a house, and a man is the man allowed to decide about it. Underneath a single page that named Anna as caretaker with authority to call electricians, masons, plumbers, and to pay them without asking me if I truly meant to fix what needed fixing. Helen's handwriting in the corner of a photocopy. Trust her. Sit, Anna said, and placed a pen in my hand. I sat. I signed. It felt less like claiming and more like finally agreeing with what had been true for longer than I knew. Now, she said with a nod that dismissed the paperwork to the small room where it belongs. You eat. And then you sleep. I'm not hungry, I said. You are, she said, and carried from the kitchen a plate with bread that did not need adjectives and a small dish of something green and clean oil with herb salt you could taste in the back of your teeth. I tore, I dipped, I ate, and discovered I had been lying to myself about hunger since Helen died. You rest, she said when the plate was lighter. Stay, I said, surprising us both. She shook her head. I live 3 houses away, she said. If I stay, I will tidy. And if I tidy, you will feel like you do not live here. She reached into her sweater and set on the table a small cell phone that looked indestructible. This is the house phone. Only 4 numbers saved: mine, the Lisbon office, the plumber, and the man who brings fish on Fridays. You will remember the fish. What about my American phone? I asked. She looked at me in a way that made me feel known. Turn off, she said gently. You need to be here to be here. After she left, I took her advice. I placed my American phone in a drawer with the Lisbon envelope, not as punishment, but as a truce. I walked the rooms with the same quiet method I had used in my American house. But this walkthrough didn't catalog what would stay and what would go. It asked what belonged where. Helen would have liked the question. The bedroom faced a small street where the wind learned to behave itself. A bowl on the dresser held 2 smooth stones the size of a man's decision. I put Emily's crayon star from Christmas at the back of the bowl so its glitter could misbehave quietly. The bathroom had a window that let the sea announce the hour and a towel that trusted air. I set my razor on the sink and thought of the sandalwood scent Helen loved. I reminded myself to buy a bar in town, not because I needed to smell like memory, but because some memories deserve company. When sleep came, it did what Anna promised. I woke to noon light and the sound of plates somewhere, not mine. For a while, I lay there and let the foreign familiarity of the ceiling teach me a new map. The mattress forgave me for my age when I stood. The tile was cool. The mirror caught my face and did not accuse. I walked to the market Anna had pointed at with her palm. The path took me past 3 houses that were not embarrassed by their age. A woman in a doorway beat dust from a rug with a rhythm that made sense. A cat considered me and withheld judgment. 2 boys chased a ball that had more miles in it than my truck. The market kept its promises. Bread that would have insulted a plastic bag sat in paper sleeves. Olives like good punctuation glistened in a shallow bin. A man behind the counter asked me a question in Portuguese and I answered with a smile. He chose a loaf for me and handed it over like a handshake. Obrigado, I said, and he nodded as if I had passed a small exam. Back at the house, I sliced the bread with a knife that had learned it was a partner and not a weapon. I ate standing at the counter because new places ask you to stand for a little while before they allow you to sit. I took the bread and a lemon and 2 cups to the terrace and finally sat. The sea kept talking. I listened. Sometime in the late afternoon, Anna returned. She knocked the way a person does who understands doors. You are awake, she said, approving as if I had learned to breathe on schedule. I am, I said. Do you have time to tell me the story? Helen said you owed her life for Anna's eyes. Did that thing eyes do when a memory insists without asking if now is a good time? She sat across from me. I was 20, she said. I thought I married a good man, she shrugged. He was good at being charming. That is different. I nodded because the difference is most of what the second half of a life teaches you. When he left, she went on. He left a mess. Not just money, paper, debts someone had put in my name. Lies that stick. Your wife came to the cafe where I worked and asked me if I had a lawyer. I laughed. Lawyer for a girl who served coffee. She looked at me like I was saying something rude about her friend. You have me, she said. I told her I could not pay. She said, you can cut my hair. I am not a hairdresser. Anna smiled at the absurd mercy of the past. She went with me to the office in town. She introduced me to a woman who could make the paper behave. She sat with me while I signed. She made the woman explain every line twice. She wrote notes on the notes. That sounds like her, I said. She saved my name, Anna said, and her voice went soft in a way it had not yet. And when my mother was sick, your wife brought soup and made the bed and told my proud mother that she needed practice before she could help Americans correctly. Your wife let people keep their dignity. That is more than money. We let quiet sit with us for a while, the way one invites a good neighbor to the porch. When she asked me to keep this house ready, Anna said finally, I promise, like a person promises when she knows what she is saying yes to. I check the shutters. I open the windows when the rain ends. I change the sheets so the bed does not forget being useful. It is not work, she added. It is, she searched for a word. Guarding. Thank you, I said, and meant gratitude at a level of bone. We will go for dinner, she said, standing, switching registers the way people do who refuse to make their kindness an event. The cafe by the square. They know your name as the husband of Helen. You will correct them. You will say, I am Richard. And then you will say, I am Richard, who is Helen's husband. Both truths can fit. We walked to the square in the hour when the day forgives itself. Light caught on the wine glasses and the edges of the conversation. The cafe tables held people who were not in a hurry to finish being alive. Anna greeted the owner the way you greet a person who doesn't need to be reminded where he is. He brought a soup that didn't apologize for being simple and fish that made me feel like my mouth had been too noisy for too many months. Wine? He asked. Half Anna said to him then to me, so you sleep. I slept anyway. Back at the house, I stood on the terrace and made a ritual out of nothing. I placed a lemon on the table and rolled it with my palm until the scent lifted. I pressed my fingertip into the rind just enough to make the air tell stories. I closed my eyes and saw Helen sitting where I stood, ankles crossed, book in her lap she would pretend to read while watching people be human. I didn't talk to her. The sea did enough of that for both of us. The next morning, I woke early and took the alley Anna had mapped for me to the bakery. An old man set chairs out front with a care that suggested he believed in the day but knew it needed proof. He put a plate of paste de nata in the window and the custard looked like sunlight that had decided to behave itself. I bought two, carried them home in a paper bag that made a gentle noise and ate them on the terrace with coffee that finally remembered how it wanted to taste. I wrote a letter to Emily that I did not intend to send. I am learning the names of things that do not need me to pronounce them well for them to keep being themselves. I told her about the cat 2 houses down who pretends to own the path and the way the neighbor hangs laundry with a rhythm like a song you only hear when you're quiet. I told her the sea is louder at night but kinder in the morning. I told her I had a seat for her if she wanted to test that theory herself. When I finished, I folded the paper and put it under the bowl of lemons like ballast. There's a defiance in writing what you don't intend to mail. It makes you honest without demanding an audience. By late morning, the village had learned me enough to wave. The woman with the rug nodded with the respect you give the persistent. The boys with the ball included me in the grammar of their game by pretending not to. Anna texted me a single word linens and I answered with a picture of the bed made. We were learning from each other. In the afternoon, I called Peter on the house phone because international plans are for people who think they won't go home. Everything's in order, he said. Your porch has been quiet. Good, I said. Let it be. Shall I forward anything I received from your children's council? Yes, I said to my post office box and to the fish man on Friday. He laughed the way a man laughs when he's relieved to be included in a joke that is not at anyone's expense. After I hung up, I turned my American phone on for the first time in 2 days. A stack of messages arrived like a weather report from another country. Mark, 3 texts, 2 voicemails. Laura, 1 text that said, "Pie, Sunday." And then after a day, we came. You were gone. Emily, a single message with a heart and a question mark. I wrote back to her alone. I'm safe. I'm where your grandmother wanted me to be. When you're ready, I have a chair waiting. I put the phone in the drawer again. It would wait. Portugal waits well. As dusk settled, Anna walked up the lane and leaned on the gate the way people do when they have decided a threshold should be a seat. Tomorrow, she said, markets in Lula. We buy bowls you do not need, but that will make soup taste like it belongs. I have a weakness for bowls, I said. You have a weakness for things that hold, she corrected. And I decided to let that land where it should. When she left, I did the small chores that make a place your responsibility. Rinsed dishes, wiped counters, shook crumbs into a palm, and gave them to the plants. I stood at the sink and looked at the lemon tree someone had taught to be domestic, and thought of my lemon tree an ocean away, probably complaining about the wind. There is pride in plants that learn to stay in place. There is pride, too, in men who learn to move. Before sleep, I took Helen's photograph from my wallet and set it on the bedside table. It looked right there in a way it had never quite looked right anywhere else since she left. I turned off the light and listened to the sea and thought about how sound can be a wall and a door at the same time. I chose the door. In the morning, I would buy bowls and salt and words for thank you that would feel less like performing and more like agreeing. Soon after, I suspected there would be the kind of ring from my American phone that you answer, not because you have to, but because you've decided your voice is better in the conversation than the silence you leave behind. For now, I let Portugal teach me the shape of a day. That does not ask me to justify it. I slept, and when I dreamed, the house did not scold me for leaving the lights on. It just held. The municipal hearing room smelled faintly of old varnish and recycled air. The kind of place where decisions that change lives get made without fanfare. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing everything in the same pale color faces, wood panels, even the flag in the corner. I sat at the far end of the long table, my hands resting lightly on a manila folder. Inside was the sum of months' work pages that could turn a lifetime of subtle humiliation into one final silent reckoning. Mark and Laura walked in together flanked by a lawyer I didn't recognize, a younger man with perfect hair and the overconfidence of someone who still believed the world bent to him if he smiled the right way. Mark didn't look at me at first. He was too busy adjusting his tie, the same habit he had when he lied as a teenager. Laura, however, met my eyes. Her expression was not defiance this time, but calculation, like she was still measuring the odds. Emily was there, too, sitting quietly in the back row. She'd told me she didn't have to come, that she had exams. But when I'd heard the door of my truck slam shut that morning and found her standing there with her bag, I didn't argue. Her presence, now steady, unblinking, was the only warmth in the room. The council clerk called the meeting to order, and we all took our seats. Mr. Hale, the chair began today, will be reviewing the petition filed by your children regarding the transfer and sale of your property on Maple Lane. Transfer and sale. Words clean enough to hide the truth. They wanted me out. Not just out of the house Helen and I had built, but out of the last place where my life still felt like mine. Mark's lawyer spoke first, his voice all courtesy on the surface. He painted a picture of an aging father unable to keep up with the burdens of ownership of children stepping in for his good. This isn't about taking something away, he said smoothly. It's about protecting Mr. Hale's well-being. I didn't move. I let the words hang there heavy with false concern. When it was my turn, I opened the manila folder and spread its contents across the table. Photographs, receipts, letters, and even a few grainy black and white copies of Helen's meticulous ledgers. Protecting my well-being. My voice was steady, almost mild. I've been maintaining that property without a mortgage for 6 years. Taxes paid on time, repairs handled, utilities current. But that's not the point. I slid one of Helen's letters toward the chair. The point is that Helen owned more than just a house, and she made her wishes very clear. Mark frowned. Dad, what are you? I cut him off by sliding a document toward their lawyer. It was a notarized addendum to Helen's will, one they had never seen. In it, she outlined the trust she'd established for Emily, using not just the house, but the adjoining 2-acre lot I'd quietly purchased under a holding company months after Helen's diagnosis. The property wasn't in my name anymore. It wasn't in theirs either. Laura's face drained of color. You can't just I can, I said softly. And I did. Everything Helen left me, I chose to protect the same way she would have. You talked about upkeep and taxes. You never once talked about her garden, her lemon tree, her rosemary hedge. You saw square footage. We saw 25 years of our lives. The council chair cleared his throat. Clearly uncomfortable with the personal turn. Given this new documentation, he said, there's no basis for the petition. He closed the file in front of him. The property in question is no longer subject to transfer under this request. That was it. No dramatic gavel slam, no shouting, just the quiet collapse of their plan. Mark leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if trying to keep his composure. Laura's hand tightened around her purse strap. Their lawyer began gathering papers, avoiding my eyes. When it was over, I stood and buttoned my jacket. Emily rose from her seat without a word and fell into step beside me. We walked out into the cool afternoon air. The sound of the flag snapping in the wind above us. Grandpa, she asked as we reached the truck. Yes, Em, you didn't have to tell them about the trust, did you? I shook my head. No, but sometimes you have to let people know exactly where they stand. She thought about that for a moment, then smiled faintly. You are impossible to beat. I didn't answer. In truth, It wasn't about winning. It was about writing the last chapter myself with Helen's hand still guiding mine in every decision. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the green mug in front of me. Steam rose from fresh coffee. The garden outside was dark, the rosemary hedge casting long shadows across the stone path. Somewhere in the distance I thought I could hear Helen's laughter, not sharp like Mark's had become, but warm the way it used to be when the world was still ours. Tomorrow I would start the work of pruning and tending again. Not for them, not even for me, but for the promise I'd made when we planted it all that it would never be left to strangers. Spring arrived in Portugal like someone opening a window you didn't know was painted shut. The mornings were still cool enough to make coffee feel like a favor, but by noon the light gathered itself and lay down on everything that held still, long enough stone tile lemon skin, the face of the sea that refused to stop moving. I had learned the rhythms of the lane. The bakery door swinging open at 7. The cat deciding which wall was his kingdom today. Anna's soft, precise knock on days when she brought bread I hadn't asked for. Emily's flight landed on a Thursday. I stood at the low rail outside arrivals with a little sign Anna insisted I carry because the world should be formal at least once. It felt ridiculous until I saw her scan the crowd and light up when she found her name in my block letters. She ran those last 3 steps the way kids run before they remember dignity. When she reached me, she hugged me the way people do who don't apologize for taking up space. "You're here," she said into my coat. "I am," I said into her hair, which smelled like something citrus and honest. "And so are you." Anna waited in the short-term lot engine off, elbow out the window like a person who trusted time to behave. "Bem-vinda menina," she said when Emily slid into the back seat. "Welcome," she reached her hand back like a queen knighting a citizen. Emily shook it as if she'd been born into this exact chair this exact hour. The drive from Faro felt like a long exhale. Emily watched everything the way I had on my first day, but with more delight and less suspicion, pointing sometimes and letting out the smallest, "Oh," when a ruin surprised her by still standing. Anna narrated like a patient aunt. "Bread there, best fish here. Pharmacia, don't worry, you don't need." The man with tomatoes who looks angry is not angry. He is concentrating. When we turned onto the lane with the stone walls, Emily pressed her forehead to the glass. "It's like a movie," she said, then corrected herself. "No, it's like what movies try to be." We stopped in front of the White House with blue shutters that still seemed to believe in itself. Emily stood looking at it for a few seconds before she spoke again. "Grandma knew," she whispered. "She knew what you'd need." "She did," I said, and unlocked the door with the brass key that felt more like a sentence finished than a question asked. Inside, the house received her the way good houses do, by noticing what she noticed. She walked her fingers along the built-in shelves, pressed her palm to the cool tile, stood a long time at the terrace rail with the sea in front of her, her eyes doing the kind of work school never asks them to. Anna set a bowl of lemons on the table, and in joke now between us, Emily reached for one and rolled it under her palm until the air joined our conversation. "Are we allowed to be this happy?" she asked, not flipping it with a smirk, not softening it with a laugh. "Yes," I said, and meant the word so completely it startled me. "We are allowed." We tried to show restraint with lunch and failed. Bread that did not agree with moderation, anchovies and oil that tasted like concentrated sun, olives that made you understand why people write poems about very small things. Emily made a face at her first sip of the Vinho Verde and then 5 sips later forgave it. Anna told the story about Helen and the lawyer again, this time for Emily, and added a line I hadn't heard: how Helen, after the papers were signed, insisted they go for ice cream because paper should not be the last taste in your mouth when you fix your name. Of course she did. Emily said tears not far and not needed. She always made dignity feel like something you could touch. We walked to the square in the evening. The cafe owner remembered me as the husband of Helen, and I corrected him as instructed. "I am Richard," and then added who was Helen's husband, because both truths fit without fighting. Emily ate her first paste and nodded like someone telling the body this is how sweetness should behave. She dipped a finger in the custard and tapped it on my nose. I allowed it. Some rules are not worth keeping when joy is in the room. That night, after Anna left and the village quieted down to clinks and low laughter, Emily stood on the terrace beside me and watched the sea compose itself. "Mom called," she said without looking over. She said she's sorry for all of it. I told her sorry would be better if it showed up before the mess, not after. She took a long breath. But I believed her. "She loves you," I said. "I know," she said, and did not pretend the sentence solved everything. She asked if I was coming home after break. I told her I might not. I told her I want to do a semester here. There's a program in Lisbon and one in Faro. And she stopped, laughed at herself. "Listen to me. I don't even know the words for salt yet. And I'm planning a life. Salt is S," I said, "and life is also S sometimes." She bumped my shoulder with hers. "Grandpa, I know," I said. "Do it. You're not going to tell me to think about it." "I am telling you I have watched you think about it for months without knowing that's what you were doing." I said, "Your thinking time is up." This is a doing time. She nodded like her neck had been waiting for the instruction. There's another thing, she said softer. The money you've been sending, I want to use it for this, not for Cancun and sorority dues, for Lisbon. For language, for bowls I don't need. I smiled. Use it for bowls that hold something you need. She went to bed on Portugal time like she'd been born to it. I stayed up a little while and opened the bottom drawer where the Lisbon envelope lived. Next to it sat a thinner envelope I hadn't shown anyone yet. I had been waiting for the hour when giving would not balance itself on adrenaline or the need to prove a point. The paper felt right in my hands now. The room felt ready. In the morning, I made coffee and waited until Emily's door opened with honest hair and no makeup and exactly the face of my granddaughter. I set the envelope on the table between her and the lemons. What's that? She asked, wary of gifts that bite. A portfolio, I said. Municipal bonds laddered maturities named to you started a month after your grandmother's diagnosis. The returns are boring and dependable like your grandfather. They were designed for a future that didn't know its shape. Now maybe it does. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again in the way people do when the future presses its weight and they're checking to see if their knees will hold. You set this up for me. Your grandmother did, I said. I did the paperwork. She did the part that matters. She reached for the envelope and then pulled her hand back. What's the catch? 3 catches. I said, because catches are how you keep love from making people weak. 1. You don't spend a cent to rescue your parents from anything they created, not because we don't love them, because rescue teaches the wrong lesson when the fire is the point. 2. You use it for learning and for showing up where your life is, not for buying quiet when noise would serve you. 3. You do not tell anyone the number. You're allowed to say enough and let that be the math. She nodded, tears already in her voice. I won't tell them, she said, then added because she knows I like honesty except maybe mom later when she's earned it. That seems fair, I said. We walked after breakfast to the fish man and chose something that looked like it could survive a pan. Emily did the thing where she tries to speak the language and the person you're speaking to meets you halfway out of respect. The fishman called her Menina with that fatherly laugh Portuguese men carry, and Emily laughed back because she understands how to accept kindness without owing. We bought lemons we did not need because that is now part of my brand. On our way back, Anna intercepted us with a small parcel in brown paper twine tied the way people tie things when they intend them to be opened. For the girl, she said, from your Helen. She gave it to me to give to her, but only when I believed you, seen her, had arrived in your own life. When she was gone, Emily held the parcel as if it might decide not to obey physics. We set it on the table and unwound the twine. Inside, a slim notebook, the kind Helen favored, because its paper allowed both pencil and ink without bleeding like wounded things. The first page bore Helen's handwriting, the precise square letters that made grocery lists look like affidavit. Emily, if Anna has given you this, it means your grandfather has done something brave. Brave looks boring, by the way. Papers, keys. Saying no when people want you to say yes. Brave also looks like your face and like the faces of the women before you who carried stubbornness as a virtue when it served love. I came to this house once after my diagnosis and before I told anyone. I sat where you are sitting and watched the sea. I did not feel sad. I felt relief. Not because I was leaving, but because I finally believed I had built a life that could be handed off without guilt. If you are here, it is because you are ready to learn how to keep what matters. Here is my only instruction. Don't let the people who love you most be the ones who make you smallest. Also, lemons should be rolled before cutting. It loosens them up like people. Love, Grandma Helen. Emily turned the notebook over with both hands like she might find another note underneath. There wasn't. She stood up and walked to the terrace and stood with her back to me the way you stand when you're letting joy break things inside you that needed to break. When she came back, she did not offer to let me read the page again. She put the notebook in her backpack next to her passport. That felt right. We cooked the fish at lunch and ate it with bread and a bottle of something white Anna promised us would make even bad decisions seem glamorous. It made good decisions settle more deeply into the body. We talked about school, not classes, but learning. Emily said she wanted to know how to be a person who didn't confuse praise with purpose. I said I would like to know that too. In the late afternoon, we called Laura from the house phone because Anna told us it was time to use it like a house should be used. Laura's face on the screen carried something I had not seen since she was 19. Rawest without theater. Are you okay? She asked and met me not the house. I am, I said. Your daughter is too. She nodded, crying without hiding, which made me love her more and forgive her everything all at once. I'm trying, she said. It shouldn't have taken this but I am. You will need to practice. I said like piano. She laughed hiccuping. You sent me my piano books to say that. I did. Can I? She started then. Reset. May I come? Not now. Later. When you invite me. You may. I said when I invite you later. We hung up before gratitude became a performance. Emily put her head on the table like a person who has been holding a heavy thing and is allowed to set it down. That was good, she said. Hard but good. Most good is like that, I said. If it's easy, it's cake. Cake is good, too, she said. Because 20-year-olds are excellent at catching your seriousness and softening it on purpose. But pie is better. Pie is patience. I said pie is on Sundays. We did not call Mark. That was not punishment. That was the weather. On Sunday, I sent him a photo of a slice of lemon pie on a plate with a fork and wrote, "Pie next month. Sunday 2 o'clock. If you come to talk about square footage, you eat on the porch." He texted back a single letter K, which is the modern way to say, "I have heard you and dislike everything you represent." It's a start. The last tasks were mechanical. I spoke to Peter about making Portugal my primary residence and the American house a life estate with a conservation easement on the adjoining lot. Helen's garden preserved by law not by argument. Name he asked for the easement language. I told him to call it the Helen Hale Garden Covenant and he hummed the sound of a man who appreciates a label that will stand on a certificate without embarrassment. We went over beneficiary designations, health directives and the small print that turns into large courtroom posters when his families forget how to be families. I signed with a hand that didn't shake. He sent me scans with stamps and we both let the paper be the power it is when used for something besides greed. Anna learned to knock once and then announce herself like the CA Anna. She brought bowls from the market. I didn't need that to make the soup taste like it belonged to us. Emily learned the shortcut to the square and the name of the fishman's dog and how to ask for a thing without apologizing for wanting it. She went back to the States for 3 weeks to file her leave of absence paperwork and returned with a carry-on and a look that said she had carried exactly the right amount of herself. This time Laura came to my American house once, left a small vase of flowers on the porch with a card that read, "I am practicing." Mark sent no flowers. He did start sending photographs on Sundays. Pie at different diners, pie at home, pie that looked like an effort. In the 3rd week, he attached a picture of his hand fixing a cabinet hinge. It was out of focus. It was perfect. One evening after dinner, Emily read from Helen's notebook, not the letter she kept that private. The back pages where Helen had listed small instructions she wrote as if she were whispering secrets to a granddaughter at a sleepover she had waited her whole life to host. Don't buy shoes that apologize for your life. If a man raises his voice to make a point, tell him his point is lonely. Plant rosemary where you can brush against it accidentally. It will remind you to use your hands. When you let someone love you, insist they learn the names of your grandparents. Emily closed the notebook and looked at me with Helen's eyes and her own. She knew me without knowing me. She said she paid attention. I said, "Paying attention is the kindest form of love I know." We sat quietly for a while, which is not the same thing as silence. Then Emily stood and went to the kitchen and came back with a lemon and a knife. She rolled the lemon under her palm the way the letter told her to. She cut and the air did what air does when you tell it a story. "I'm staying," she said, "a semester, maybe more. Not to run away, to run toward." Mom cried when I told her. She said she wanted to come visit and see what I see. I told her maybe later. Later is a good word. I said it's honest. It gives space for people to earn. "And Mark," she asked, "he will come for pie?" I said he will sit on the porch at first and then at the table and then maybe one day he'll show up without an agenda. We let time be the lawyer for that part. Anna knocked once, then Anna. She came out to the terrace and set a small plate between us. 3 cookies dusted with sugar the way stars dust the edge of a clear night. "For dessert," she said, as if we'd done something to deserve sweets. "We have," Emily said, surprising me. "We told the truth." "Yes," Anna said. "And we did not turn the truth into theater. This is better." We ate the cookies without making the rules of cookies bigger than they needed to be. After Emily yawned into the back of her hand with the same grace she yawned when she was 5 in my back seat on the way home from fireworks, she kissed my cheek and went to bed. Anna stayed. We watched the last of the light go. The sea go dark in patches like a dog settling. "I am thinking," Anna said finally, "that you are no longer a man arriving. You are a man who has arrived." "I think that's right." I said, "It feels less like landing and more like setting something heavy down." She nodded. "Tomorrow we will go to Lula." She said, "We will buy a bowl you don't need." "I need bowls that hold," I said, and she smiled as if she had placed a sentence exactly where it belonged. Before sleep I wrote 3 letters by hand. The first to Peter with instructions to file the garden covenant and to thank him for being the kind of man who keeps paper from hurting people. The second was to Joyce next door in America, thanking her for watering the basil and for the way she asked after me without making my answers a test. The third to Helen, not because I believe in addresses that the post office doesn't recognize, because writing to her makes me pay attention to the shape of my words. I told her Emily had rolled a lemon without prompting. I told her Laura had used the word practice and meant it. I told her Mark had sent me a picture of a hinge he fixed all by himself and how it made me prouder than any big check he ever waved. I told her I had learned to be bored by the right things and excited by others, and that this is what wisdom sounds like. I signed my name, not our name, and did not feel disloyal. Love that requires you to be smaller than you are is not love. She taught me that. She wrote it in a note that started a plan and ended a war I had been fighting with myself for years. In the morning, I woke before the village and stood on the terrace with coffee in the mug Emily bought at the market that says ooh in a font that looks like it's about to tell a joke. The sea pulled and pushed and pretended it had somewhere better to be. I put my hand flat on the table and felt the stone come up to meet it. I thought of the first morning Mark called me to tell me my life was too big for me. I thought of the blue folder, of Peter's letters, of Anna's trust, of Emily's shoulder against mine, of Laura's box, of pie, of Sundays, of lemons, of the rosemary I had planted without bitterness in a place my wife chose for me. This is what justice felt like in my hands. Not gavel, not sword, not fireworks. Just the weight is distributed correctly. Just a life that fit the man who wore it. When Emily woke, she came out with the notebook and 2 pens. Teach me how you make lists, she said. There's no right way, I said. There's the way that makes you honest. Then show me that way, she said, and set a pen between my fingers like a daughter handing her father a permission slip for the day. I wrote at the top of a clean page what we keep, what we let go, what we build. She nodded like she knew all the answers already and just needed a place to put them. We started with simple things. Bread and bowls, rosemary and language, Sundays and pie. Then we got brave. Pride and permission, dignity and distance, money and what it isn't. By noon, the page was full and the lemons needed rolling again. The cat chose our wall for his kingdom and tolerated our presence. The fisherman waved like someone who has decided you belong, even if you do not pronounce it perfectly. The sea performed its old trick of being exactly what it was without explanation. Later, when the day had done most of its work, and the shadows were long enough to remind you the sun has limits, Emily tucked Helen's notebook into her bag and stood. Let's go buy bowls we don't need, she said. Let's, I said. We walked down the lane past houses that had learned to outlast whatever came at them. We did not hurry. There was no longer any reason to.